how's everybody doing?
Pretty good.
It's
Pretty
the
good.
Dev Talk Show. Hey, Chris, we are live with the Dev Talk Show tonight on Wednesday. Today is July 7th. The summer is kicking along. We just had the 4th of July weekend. We could talk a little bit about that, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm going to give Chris a minute to get himself set up if he needs. Rich Ross says smooth opening. Yeah. Chris is the master engineer over here. And you notice from the scene here, by the way, although Rich Ross Dev is with us in the chat, you see only the two of us tonight on video. So that's just the way it works sometimes. But it's nice of Rich to be in the background. He's probably listening and hanging out with us. And there are conflicts, and that happens sometimes. Chris, smooth start. How are you, man? How's it going?
Pretty good. Like you said, 4th of July here in the United States just went by on a Sunday. So I imagine a lot of folks may have either had Friday or Monday. Some folks might not have. And so hopefully you did. And hopefully, so let's put it this way. I did. And so that was kind of nice. And it certainly is, a nice benefit, especially since in our family, we're all off that day. And, it was nice to. In fact, we played a board game that's new to us called Seven Wonders. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's funny, when I opened the box and kind of took a look at it, I felt some inspiration, a little bit of inspiration from a lot of different games. Like one that actually it reminded me of a little bit was Age of Empires. Just in a way, I don't want to say that it was like Age of Empires, in that you have a city. Like it might be, the famed city of Alexandria or something. And you're basically trying to build resources. You're saying, okay, we'll be able to mine ore, we'll be able to chop wood, and then later in the game, you start building things like libraries and technology, and then you also build armies. And on all these various facets of ways that you can advance, you're earning points toward the end game. And whoever has the most points at the end wins. And the thing that's kind of nice about it is, there's a lot of games out there that are somewhat open-ended in that they can sort of last and last and last and last. And this game has a built-in regulator. It would be hard for it to go longer than a half hour, just because it's got this built-in regulation where you run out of cards and that's it.
I like that idea. My huge board game family. But even if we're just playing, like classic board game. Oh God, this game just goes on like of something time boxed. Like you can extend it a little bit, but it's nice to not have on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we are hearing you cut it in and out, and I am trying to figure out if that's my end or yours. I haven't yet figured that out.
I'll tell you what I will do. Okay. Make a difference when I did?
Oh, and now the stream buffered.
Oh.
Then I saw some frames drop. But you know what? I have seen that on Twitch quite a bit lately. And I've heard other streamers talk about it too. That they're like, why am I dropping frames today? So I have not been sure yet whether to blame myself.
I wonder about the audio. I do have a ceiling fan going. And it might get frustrated by, I don't know, that to go on and off. So I don't know what's going on with that. Hopefully it's a little better.
No, it keeps cutting in and out. But the other thing that I'm seeing.
You're hearing it.
Your video's pretty smooth. My video seems pretty smooth, I think. It's just that, yes, it does kind of cut out in the middle of your sentence. It's annoying. The Skype video is not too smooth.
Are you hearing the audio clip out on Skype or on the stream?
For me, it's the same thing. That's what's difficult, right? Because I pass it from Stripe through.
No, but you listen. You're listening.
I'm
to
listening
Skype.
to you
You're
on
not
Skype.
listening to this.
Yeah. And it's cutting.
Yeah, then the problem isn't this.
Right.
My audio. Well, let me look. I don't see anything weird going on. If it's going softer and louder, or is it like clipping?
It clips.
Actually, like out.
It clips, yeah.
Wow. I'll tell you what.
See, what I'm trying to decide is whether we should restart the stream, but I'm not seeing.
It's not the stream though. If you hear it on Skype.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I wonder if it's like restarting Skype and the Skype call.
It could be. Do you notice any difference now?
Well, you probably have to talk for a little bit. Nope, you're out there for a second. Yeah.
Oh man, what's that all about?
I wonder if it's I wonder what it is.
I can drop out of Skype and come back in, you know.
Yeah, we can try that.
All right. Let me I'm going to hang up and then maybe you'll stay on the stream.
Let's see what happens on the show here when we kill the call. It's probably going to freeze his view. What I'm going to do is so we use Skype to talk and you know, part of the reason is because it makes it there's a lot of different ways to share the screen, but in order to share it the way we do, what you're seeing up there, it has some built-in features for content creators to where, you know, it looks like you're getting a live feed from his camera. So anyways, yeah, so we're hoping to get to some developer talk, and one of the things that we were gonna talk tonight about keeping up with things and learning things, and let's see what happens here. Because I'm just hoping it's not my system. The worst thing would be if for some reason maybe OBS, you know, because OBS has been on quite a bit today, and gosh, did I need to restart it? You know, because that would mean shutting off the stream. So Andy's getting ready to jump back in here, and we will see if we can seamlessly add him back to the show. But that's what we're hoping to talk about with you tonight is we were going to talk about various things that developers do to either broaden their skill set or narrow it. And so it's kind of that whole specialist versus generalist conversation. But I was saying, like, I feel like it's more than that. It's choosing what your path is and how do you make those choices. And because I have some interesting ideas. I think they might be interesting anyways. I hope they are to you. I hope they are to everybody watching. So Andy is coming back in now, and let's see if he seamlessly joins back up. And there he is on the screen.
Hey,
and
I'm here.
Hearing him. Yep, hearing him just fine.
All right, let's hope this works.
Let's hope it was just that. There was just some funky thing about the Skype call. And because I was just saying, Skype, you know, there's a lot of different choices for teleconferencing, but what Skype buys us is the ability to just drop you into the frame the way you did just now. Drop in, drop out. It almost looks like we have some kind of remote feed. So that's what's cool.
Yeah, and you know, I've been interested in trying Teams because Teams has that feature now.
Yeah.
And we worry enough about getting set up the way we are, like making another change to the whole thing, you know, could introduce some trouble. But, you know, it's possible that Teams is more stable nowadays. I mean, I think that's where they're putting their investment. So it might be worth doing that. Hopefully the audio is staying on now.
Yeah, I think you would have cut out in and out during what you just said.
All right.
So,
I restarted Skype completely, like shut down Skype, restarted Skype. So let's get back into it. I heard you saying on the stream a little bit that, you know, what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
We want to, you know, talk about some dev stuff, and we can come back and talk about our 4th of July weekends later.
Right.
But, you know, we ate up some of our chit-chat time there, I think, with some technical difficulties. So what do you want to talk about? You were saying, what were you saying when I was out?
One of the things that, and you know, this is funny because I didn't feel like the conversation was, because I think this is too short. It's not nuanced enough. Is like the specialist versus generalist conversation. Should you know a lot, or should you focus on one thing? Because I think the reality is, for different parts of your career or different positions inside a company, it could be a startup, it could be enterprise, you want different breadth or depth of knowledge. So I never really pinned down that it was like, what should you be? Like, that's not really it.
Right. When I started my career, I remember very much wanting to be a specialist. I remember saying, I want to get really good at something. And by the way, I still think that's actually a really good idea. But maybe not to the full extent. In other words, there was a time in my career where I wanted to say, I don't want to do any web or JavaScript or HTML, or I just want to focus on C#. I just want to be like a C# developer. That's pretty specialized, right? Like not thinking about other things. And I think, I think a lot of people feel that way from time to time. And we could talk about, I think, the pros and cons of why that may be a good idea or a bad idea. And when we can talk about pros and cons here, I think it's situational, right? The pros for one person might not be the same pros. They might be cons for another person and things like that, right? And there's not really a right answer here. This is an example. This is one of those topics where it really, it depends on who you are, what your goals are, and for your career and things like that. But we could talk about some of that because some people might be wondering, what do I gain from one of these versus the other, and what are the drawbacks? And I think there's a lot to talk about. I will say this, right from right now, I would consider myself a generalist. Mm-hmm. And I've often considered myself the old full stack developer, which sort of makes you a generalist, but I think there's more to it. We could set the tone on like, what does it mean to be a specialist or generalist full stack developer? Maybe we should start with that. I'll throw out a couple little definitions. You tell me what you think, Chris. But when I think of a specialist, it's kind of like what I said before. You're either just doing C# development. Maybe you're just doing JavaScript. I mean, you probably dabble in a little bit more than just JavaScript, maybe with a little HTML and CSS and those kind of things. Or you could say that a specialist maybe does React as their very specialist, right? Not just JavaScript, but I am a React developer. And maybe I know all about React and I can do the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript within React, but I don't do ASP.NET or something like that, right? I'm React developer.
Right.
So I think that's again, even specialist is a little hard to pin down because you could say within React, well, are you just a JavaScript developer? Would you say you were a specialist if you just did Blazor? Well, you got to do C# and HTML. So maybe I was going too narrow on specialist. What do you think?
I think that for me, a specialist is even narrower than, and I'm not, this isn't fair at all because you put something out there. I'm the one that gets to throw a dart at it.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
I even think React is a generalist discipline. If we're going to pick something like that, saying that you're good at Blazor, good at React, good at, I don't know, let's keep going, good at Flask in Python, good at, there's still a lot to know there because you probably are going to know, like you said it, you're going to understand how that stuff becomes HTML and CSS. How does it make remote calls, HTTP calls to web APIs and things like that. When I think about a specialist, I think drilling even further into things that I think most of us generally would be scared to say, hey, this is what I specialize in. For example, I don't know how relevant this is today, but I remember I knew someone who at the dawn of Bluetooth, when Bluetooth was just sort of making its way into PCs, he decided he knew a little bit about writing device drivers. He had fought those battles, writing Windows device drivers, and he had the battle scars. And he said, I think there's going to be work to be done to write Bluetooth drivers. So, and I'm going back a long ways, but I have someone in mind who made the decision
Okay. Yep.
to specialize very deeply in writing Bluetooth drivers, and he just started hiring out for everyone that needed it, and it turned out it was a gold rush for a little while. Anything you were building, you know,
that's pretty specialized. Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, I think that's an extreme case.
Pretty
I think
extreme.
I think it's probably hard for some people to get that specialized. But that's okay. That's good. So I think what we've established is there's like degrees of specialization, right? Just like there's degrees of generalization, right? You could say a generalist is someone who is a full stack developer, right? When I say full stack, again, what does that mean, right? Well, to me, full stack developer is someone who does everything from the database to the UI, right? And everything in between. And that's a generalist, right? You could also say that, but that's a web development generalist. That's
Sure.
not even really all that general, because I could say, well, a generalist does, well, I didn't say web, but I was thinking in my head the UI was like a web UI, right? But
Yeah.
let's just say that as generalist might also do Windows applications or cross-platform applications and web applications, and works with you can really go. I like to think of myself as pretty general. I stay mostly within the Microsoft family, right? In other words, I don't write Java, okay? But because that would be really, really, really generalist. Like if you say, hey, I'll write any language. Like I remember at a time when I was like, C# and VB.NET were very competitive in the earlier days, and people would say, well, I've got a job for VB.NET, and some people would say, well, what's the difference? I'll do one or the other. And I remember a time when I drew a line, and this was before VB.NET had was fading, whatever. But I said, no, I want to at least specialize in a language. I want to get good at a language, and so I chose C# as my language. But sorry, I'm babbling here a little bit, but from the generalization stuff. But I also work with a little bit of machine learning. I've done bot framework. I've done bot stuff. I work with Azure services and cognitive services and things like that. And I think, a generalist sort of needs to be able to jump into different paradigms or platforms, not just, right? It's pretty broad.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So, the term full stack developer got popularized, in the last 10 years, maybe? Did we say it? I don't think we said it in 2005. I'm just going to throw that out there. But
I feel like we've been saying it for a while.
We have.
Sorry, I did.
And I think where it came from was somebody, you eventually had someone who could thread, and I shouldn't say thread the needle because it sounds narrow that way, but they could drive the whole train from the front end project. Let's say we're in the Linux world, and so you're using Node, the Express framework, going back to a MongoDB database, and also writing the web APIs that your front end code might interact with, and also the web APIs that other consumers might call. And you were able to work on all that code, all of it. You could dive into the queries. Now we could replace all those components. I picked the ones I did on purpose, because that way it would be easy for me to come in and say, hey, I plucked out, like, that's Linux, that's Node, that's Express, that's Mongo, and web APIs. Well, let's throw in C#, Blazor, SQL Server, and the API controllers. There's a parallel. And then we could head to Python and Flask and so on. And so we could build these parallels. So it's not so important to me what the platform or technology or languages are. The fact is, as you said, this one developer, they could write the query for the database. They can get data from it. They can push data to it. They can also write, the endpoints that are going to be called either by consumers or even your own front end. And then they can work a little on that front end. That kind of became, hey, I kind of need this developer that gets it all, because if it's too compartmentalized, then I have this database expert who is never quite delivering exactly what's needed. It feels a lot like things are getting thrown over multiple walls, and there's what you really want is a fence. Like, you can see through the fence, and you can You can have good conversations. Like, you have a neighbor in a picket fence. You can stand at that fence and talk to the neighbor, but if it's a brick wall, you know, and so I think full stack became, and I'm sure you've seen that people online will like, they'll complain about the full stack developer or whatever now. Now it's become the in thing to say like, nah, but you wanted someone who, it wasn't a mystery to them what was happening at the SQL layer. It wasn't a mystery to them what was happening with the web API, that they were just so focused on HTML, CSS that they just didn't know what else was going on. But the flip side of having that developer, which is probably someone you want on an enterprise team, is, are they ever going to be very good really drilling into, for example, the responsive design of the website so it looks great on mobile, great on desktop?
Right.
You need that specialist for that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So let's focus on specialists for a while and think about, when is a specialist valuable, right? You know, what are the pros to being a specialist, right? Because you were already saying, well, you know, you're starting to go into this already. You're saying, well, the generalist isn't always that great at some of these things, right? So I think you're leaning towards like, so now we're not taking sides here. We're not saying specialist is better or worse, but let's talk about the strengths and like why it might be valuable to have a specialist and why someone might want to become a specialist, right? Do you have any thoughts? I mean, I kind of I'm throwing it out as a question to you. Like, what do you?
Yeah. So I think, and you know, look, I did give an extreme example earlier, but if I pick on our friend Troy Hunt a little bit, when I say Troy Hunt, what do you, if one word to describe what Troy Hunt does, and you can't say like programming, I'm just curious if you're going to say the same word I will. Like we're playing password.
Security.
Security. You said this. That's exactly the word I was going to say. So what I'm going to kind of posit here is that one reason and one way to be a specialist, this is not the only way, is you build a developer brand as a security specialist. Now, what does that necessarily mean? It means you're probably going to consult a lot of different places, getting them up to speed, right?
But even within security, you know, that could be a generalist. I mean, it's really interesting how we can have these terms that aren't very clear and specific. You could say one person is a web security specialist, another person is understands security of platforms and things like that. I mean, there's like a lot of ways you know, thinking about data storage and data at rest and data in transit and all these different things. So even that, you know, I think I've gotten the impression, you know, that he's a generalist in the security area, right? So even there, maybe there's levels of this, you know what I mean? But I mean, I think of, you know, to me, a good classic example of a specialist, you could almost say, is like the DBA, right? Because they might be in our organizations or in our shops or on our teams and things like that, but they definitely have an area where they focus on, right? And that's an example where like developers dabble in that area, and some developers are really good at it, but I don't know too many that are like DBA level good at it. And if you're one of those, you know, forgive me, right? I'm not trying to, but you know, often a DBA is a very good, I think, is a good example of a specialist, right? They know the ins and outs of it. But, you know, there are people that have sort of brand recognition, I guess, in different areas of specialization. I think about, you know, a Jim Woolley on Link, right? Entity Framework would be like Julie Lehrman. Like these are people that have built like brand on certain kind of things, right?
Julie has definitely built the Entity Framework brand over the years. I mean, no doubt about it. As far back as I can remember, I would associate Entity Framework and Julie Lehrman. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
I just
Right.
And another thing is, and we may not, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but I saw somebody who has a whole, and I feel bad because I didn't subscribe to the channel, so I'm not going to be able to tell you who it is, although if I think about it, maybe I can get it into the show notes, who is specializing in teaching you blockchain and Ethereum specifically. And here's why I want to bring this person up. I still don't quite get, and I don't want to say that, I'm not negative about this. It hasn't quite come across to me after watching a couple of the intro videos of like, how do I make that a career exactly? But it's starting to sink in, like I'm starting to get it.
Right.
But it is pretty narrow. It's like, hey, this channel is about teaching you to be a great Ethereum developer so that you can go get jobs or whatever, helping businesses implement blockchain on Ethereum.
So what's the benefit? What's the value add of a specialist, right? In this case, this is a person who can teach other people how to do it, right? Teaching is a good example of why it pays to be a specialist, right? There's going to be people that want to learn a particular skill, right? And I may, what is this thing? Ethereum, right? I'm not even familiar with it.
Exactly.
I don't even know what it is. But let's just say I want to dabble in it, right? Well, I got to learn it from someone.
Right.
So not everyone that this person teaches is even going to be a career Ethereum developer. However, this person has a reputation. If you want to learn this, they're the person to go to for that. And so there's a really good use case for a specific, skill set, is to be the teacher of it. We need people. I would say this, though. We need specialists at some level. We need specialists. We need people to solve the hard problems in a particular platform or language or framework or, whatever it is. We need to have people that we can go to where that person is the specialist, right? And so I think it's really important that people do that. And you can actually get a little bit of it's interesting you were saying about building up a brand. Being that specialist can sort of help you get a little bit of that developer, celebrity stuff, right? The people on Stack Overflow that particularly answer certain questions all the time. They grab these certain questions in whatever domain that is. They grab it and they answer it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this is the person who's the expert, right? And you can really build up a good brand that way by being an expert. Yep. And that can lead to financial reward, right?
Sure.
I mean, you can definitely get different kind of jobs from that. But again, that's maybe even going a little bit more extreme than I was thinking.
Yeah.
Again,
I'm not necessarily. So I wanted to be really careful not to give the impression that I only think of specialization as consultant, because I don't. But it is certainly a pivot. It's one pivot, right? Where it's like, there was a time when I remember, and one of the reasons why I use some of these folks is that even if I don't know them, I feel like they're very public facing, and I'm totally projecting that I think they'd be okay. Do you remember not so long ago when John Papa was like the Angular specialist? I mean, he was really, I don't want to say pushing Angular, but who would you have written an email to? John Papa, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. He was the guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's doing that these days.
Well, right. I'm not, and so I'm not 100% sure, but or like we talk about our friend Tim Corey teaching people C# and helping them become a developer. Although oddly enough now, and here's where I'd like to do that word association with you again, except this is personality association. Who comes to mind when I ask you who is leading the way and who is leading the way and in charge of C# advancement right now? Do you know who it is?
Chris Gomez?
No. I thought you would say Mads Torgerson because Mads, okay, because we know Mads.
But see, that's a different level.
But that's not
that's specialization. But that's
not who I'm going for.
Right. Okay.
Now, I'm just curious if you're going to come up with it. Who was answering all the questions on Stack Overflow and as the C# expert? I'm just curious if it'll come to mind. If not, it's okay.
I don't know, but I mean, I don't want to get into the whole name dropping. Like,
well,
now I feel like we're just like,
no, I'm not name
like,
dropping.
you know, okay.
I'm using him as an example. So Mads is like part of the team that's coming up with what to do next. And I don't know how many times I've seen new C# features, and everybody wants to ask John Skeet what he thinks about them.
Right.
Because he became known. And so isn't it interesting, though? C# is a language. Being a specialist in the language, but it's a general purpose language that you do a lot of things with. How do I classify that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what someone like John Skeet does, like, for a living or whatever, but there's value in being a really good C# developer, right? And that's I'd see again at that point where I guess I didn't want to go too far into the names, because now we're talking about there's that whole thing where I think it's a little different than the average person. I'm talking about me or you choosing a specialty versus being a generalist, and how it's going to affect. I mean, there's again, we're almost at like a 1% kind of issue when we're talking about a John Skeet or a Mads, like whatever. Like those are like very rare. Like, but for every 1,000 developers, there's far more specialists than there are John Skeets or something like that. If that makes sense, right?
I think that.
But
yeah.
Where do you? So I guess what I'm thinking though along that lines is where does being a specialist hurt you, right? Because let's put it this way: if in my organization, I don't want to speak ill of John Skeet because I don't know him. I don't think I've ever met him.
Right.
And I don't know what his knowledge is outside of C#, but maybe he answers questions on all topics. But if you were the John Skeet of C# and that was the only thing you knew, I'd have a hard time hiring you, because my organization isn't big enough for us that level of specialist, right? Like, I just don't have enough places for someone that can only do one thing. And so, I mean, I think that's, I don't know if that's the case with this person. I don't want to be, throwing this person under the bus.
No, I'm not trying to say that either.
A great developer.
I think what I was kind of aiming for is some people, like I could even think of people who were like the experts at C++ or something, or gosh, who really knew COM. We all kind of had to know how to use the thing, but this person really, so again, that kind of like leans down the consulting route. But I think kind of where I was trying to go is that it's so natural for somebody trying to decide what to do next is to feel, this is the overwhelming part of the career sometimes, is to feel like you gotta know a lot, or maybe even quote unquote everything. Because you've said you don't want to, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, but so you manage teams, you consider people to hire.
It's part of my job. Yep.
Right. I think that's true, right?
Yeah.
And so you were just kind of saying, you're not going to hire somebody who's they can't just be really great at C#. I mean, gosh, can they write to our database? Which is not so much C# as it is knowing some library, some framework. We just talked about entity framework. Right. Maybe you use that. Right. Maybe you don't. Maybe you use Dapper. I don't know. Who cares? Maybe you stored procedures. I don't know. Can the person do it?
Another example would be like someone who only knows JavaScript, right? Maybe that's an easier example to make. It's hard to put them on a team where you need someone you might need someone who's good at JavaScript, but you need someone that knows C# and a little bit of database and a little bit of these other things, right? And that person might really help the team on certain projects, but it doesn't help the team on others. And so I think that's to me, the advantage of a generalist, right? Someone who you can hire because you don't know what the next piece of work is going to be needed, right? And I was thinking about this a little bit as we're starting the show, and I was thinking, I think a lot of this has to do with the size of the team and the size of the company, right? the bigger the team, the bigger the company that has, more and more developers, I think you really have the ability now to get specialists in place because, you don't need one person to do all these different things. You can say, I can deploy this person to do this project and this person to do this. Like there's so many different ways to mix it up. When you have more, I think a bigger team can really support specialists. I think small teams, it's hard if you want to have, cross training and things like that across the team. I mean, is that something, have you seen that, like where bigger companies have specialists?
Yeah, like if you're, when we say big, I mean, we're talking like a huge enterprise, right?
Sure.
In some cases, I think you could see that, well, it depends on how they break down their organization. If it's a lot of teams building a lot of different products, then just the fact that the company is big nothing's changed because each of those teams kind of learn their own domain and you end up having microcosms. It's almost like having a lot of little companies under one roof. You just haven't realized it yet.
Well, it doesn't have to be a big company. Think about a big team. Some development teams have 4 people building an application or 2 people building an application. Some development teams have, let's just not even go extreme, but let's just say 10 or 15 developers working on the same application or system. Okay. And with 15 people, I would argue, and again, this is a hypothesis, that you can afford to have 1 or 2 people that are very good at a particular part of that, right? And can't, let's say we have 15 people that are building a web app, okay? And it's a web app. It's what you would consider a full stack web app, right? Something like that. But 15 people, if I had one of them that knows nothing about anything except just to write C#, and again, I don't know if this is a real, case, I could probably afford to have that person be really good at C# because there's enough work to distribute, right? And there's enough people to pick it up.
Yeah.
Just like I could have a person that only does HTML on that team, right? Maybe I can have just an HTML CSS person, something like that. That I think, is a case where you can get those specialists in there. Is that a little closer? Because I think you made a good point. When you get in a big company, you have lots of teams. So maybe that wasn't the right.
But it depends on how, right. So if the team itself is large, you might go ahead and say, we can have someone, we've chosen Bootstrap, for example. We've made that choice.
Sure.
So I have the resources, I have the ability to go ahead and get somebody who's really, really great at Bootstrap and the whole methodology around it and producing great responsive designs that are going to look great on desktop, great on mobile. And if they don't know too much, if they're of maybe like how you might call a backend API, or maybe they don't even know C#, honestly, because we'll use the example you've given, is that just because you might be building a web app in C# doesn't mean, look, when you're on the web, you're going to know, at least you probably are going to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript at least enough to be able to debug when things go wrong. So now, can you afford to have that person who maybe they don't even know that, but you have enough? I think what you said, there was a key phrase in there. There's enough work. You've got enough work that person can focus on, hey, there is so much to do with the front end here because things are changing and moving and we're adding new screens and we're taking screens away and whatever, that it's okay that you don't actually wire the button up to call and get some response and fill that response in. There's other people who will do the majority of that.
Right. So, but on the other hand, let's just say that when you have that specialist or you have a problem, that specialist is the person that you're just like, thank God that person's on the team. I mean, I've had times where I'm like, thank God I work with this person who can solve this particular problem. They're so good at something, I can bring them the problem. I can have them, solve this for me, right? And sometimes in some organizations you have that center of excellence concept, right? Where you might have your C# center of excellence. In a large organization, let's go back to that large organization example. I think you could have a large organization where the specialists are in those like centers, and you kind of get farmed out to different teams to support different projects and things like that. And I think there's a good use case for specialists, right? But so I guess, to me, one of the core decision makers, if someone's trying to decide whether they want to be a specialist or a generalist, well, there might be a couple of reasons why you make this choice, right? One might be passion, right? And you should follow your passion. If you are really passionate about something, then be a specialist in that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There might be certain trade-offs for making that decision, but it's great to be passionate about something, right? Another way of looking at it, I think another decision factor is going to be money, right? And in some cases, being a specialist would be good for money. In other cases, I wonder if it would be bad. You probably can get paid more as a specialist in something, but do you limit your options, right? Like, is a job harder to find because you're such a specialist at a high price point or something like that? I don't know. I'm just throwing out these concepts. What do you think? Do you think a specialist is like a good financial? Again, we're not talking about you are the world's leading authority, because hey, if you could do that, good for you, right? I hope anyone's listening or watching can become the world's leading authority in anything, right? I'm talking about a slightly smaller scale of specialization, right?
Yeah. So let's try this. Let's go ahead, because I would like to think some other things that we've drilled we'll come back to. If the question is, I think you've brought up some ideas that like specializing in one thing sounds like it might be risky. What if nobody wants that one thing? Okay. What if there aren't a lot of jobs, right?
What if that thing goes away?
What if that thing goes away?
Yeah.
So here, my answer then is, it is possible, I think, to become good at specializing. Now, we have to unpack that sentence a little bit. I'm not saying, when I say that, I am not saying that you took a shot, you picked a tech, things were great for a few years, then it got abandoned, and that's the end of your career. It's not what I said. I said you are good at specializing. So that means
I get that.
You can pivot. You can recognize when it's time that another thing is up and coming, that hey, I think I've got a head start on that. Or even if I don't, I'm a pretty good study, and I think I can get a head start on that. Because how much of a head start do you really need to become valuable to others? I'm not. I don't.
Great. No, I'm just sorry. I got to answer that, because that is great what you just said.
Yeah.
I really love this concept of someone who can pivot.
Right.
How much head start do you need? Like one day. I mean, let's just be really clear.
You can be.
How often have you been the person teaching the demo, giving the demo, and solving people's problems for them? In the Valley of the Blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Well,
right?
there you go.
So
Right.
Specialization there's a scope to how specialized you need to be. And I really like this idea that you're bringing up of this pivoting specialist who's like strategic and going deep dive on things. And then guess what? Maybe as trends change, let's say you were the one who went deep on the ML stuff, right? And in a couple of years from now, everybody's doing ML. You've moved on to the next thing, right? You're the regular front runner. I love that, Chris. That's a great idea.
So, and and Andy, you're right. The point is not to bring up personalities, but it's because this was to loop all the way back to someone whose career I was thinking about when we were kind of imagining this topic earlier. And I thought, wait a second, I think that's what's happened here. Is that as things went away, they didn't go away. Now, I'm not trying to be flippant when I say how much of a head start do you need, but I like what you said about in the Valley of the Blind, the one-eyed person is king, because I will give you a personal example, and it has to do with TLS and SSL. This stuff, I can't believe every time I think I will never have to deal with this again, I go to a new team and just give it enough time, just wait, and eventually that day will come when, I don't know what's wrong, some kind of TLS thing. What do you mean? Well, it says the server could not be reached. The TLS handshake could not be completed. I mean, I almost have the error memorized, right? That's the thing. Because there's a history to this with me personally. In the past, I had to work on a project where the primary goal of the project was for our little API to be able to talk to other vendors' APIs over TLS, and it had to be mutual auth, which a lot of developers don't know about. Most of the time when we think about SSL and HTTPS, when we think about that magic, I go to Amazon.com and it's HTTPS, and that little lock appears on the screen. If you know a little about what's going on under the hood, that server is basically telling you, hey, you really are talking to Amazon.com. You are, I promise you. You really are talking to Microsoft.com. I promise you. You really are talking to Google.com. Okay. That's what
you're getting into specifics of this thing, but that's not the point of your story.
No,
right?
The point of the story is when that breaks down, a lot of developers don't know why. Right. And I happened to work on something several years ago, and I figured it out. And then at the next place, I realized that when that error message came up again, that everybody else was blind. They're like, I don't know what's wrong with it. But I'm like, well, I think I've seen this before.
So I think you're talking about a different category, though, here. And I had written this down before, okay? I'd written this down before, but hadn't brought it up yet.
Right.
There's a difference between being a specialist in TLS, and I don't think you're that.
Nope.
No offense, right?
I don't think I am either.
But you're a generalist with certain strengths, okay? And I think that is a really good category. Chris, you're the person who can come on a lot of teams, but wow, you bring certain strengths that other developers don't have, okay? What do you think of that?
I think it's an example that I just happened to have fought that battle a couple times. So where I was really trying to go with that is that when we hired that person we talked about earlier, who was a real bootstrap CSS expert, and you felt you could afford that resource, it was because you didn't have to hire that person. You have developers who can build the front end, and they can go look stuff up in HTML references and CSS references, and they can even wire it up, and it'll probably work. But when anything goes wrong, the time it takes while they're still scratching their head, this other person is like, hold on, I know what that is. And there's value in that. There's value.
Money well spent.
And so in that they already have the head start. They just look at it and they're like, no, wait a second. I've seen this before. And what it kind of means is we should really make sure that we come up with a standard for doing things a certain way. We will find that we won't run into this again and again. And you're sitting there going, it would have been 6 months before we figured that out. Because we would have made the mistake and the other mistake and then another mistake. And then finally somebody said, boy, we should really standardize on how we do. And I'm going to pick something simple. We should really standardize on how we do these buttons in Bootstrap, because everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. And it turns out that's hard to maintain, where this expert would have come in and sat down with you and said, hey, I've been looking over the code base. It's been a great first week. And we should really standardize on how we do our buttons. Because let me tell you what the value is. And quick little pitch. This person gives you a quick little pitch. You're sold as the manager. You're like, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Because you know when you hear it. You know when you're hearing expertise. You're like, this person's fought this battle.
And in a large organization, I think they can really capitalize on that, because that person can be that center of excellence, right? And they may get farmed out to different teams for a week here to troubleshoot with them, or then go on to this next project and help a bunch of people get started with stuff. There's a lot of good use cases for it. I noticed Meg left a comment in the chat.
Yep.
And I don't know if Meg's still on, but she says, I'm a generalist because I'm a newbie still, right? But I've thought of digging deep into certain topics, right? And I think that's an interesting and somewhat common place to be, right? Like when you're a newbie and you're trying to figure things out, sometimes, so maybe there, and I guess this is a case, right, where we could go back to those things I was posing, those questions before about, why dig in deep to certain topics, right? And so, sometimes it's passion. When you're a newbie, sometimes you haven't found that one thing, like, you want to be a developer, right? And you like all this stuff, but you're still looking for that one thing that's going to spark your interest. And you're like, oh, that's the thing I really want to dig in on, right? Or you might be looking at it strategically from a hiring standpoint, right? And I think there's a couple of different reasons, and there's probably others. Meg says, Rails.
So
as a specialty, right? But it may not be practical hiring wise. I don't know if it's. So here's the interesting thing, hiring and specialties, like there's really interesting dynamics going on here. Because, and we've talked about this on the show before, right? But if you are someone who can develop for a mainframe, right? That's a specialty, okay? And there was probably a time when everybody was abandoning, and you thought, well, this might not be the best idea for my career. And right now, you're probably laughing your way to the bank in your Lamborghini or whatever you're doing.
Let's hope so.
Maybe
right.
That's a stretch.
Yeah.
But because specialists are often very in demand. So the thing with something like Rails, you could say, well, maybe it's not as popular as it once was. I think that's the case. I'm not a Rails person. I don't hear it talked about much these days. So that might be what Meg is saying. And I could be totally wrong about that. But
right.
But there are places that need you and are willing to pay good money for you. And probably, this is one of those things where you set your own terms. Well, I'm going to work, of course, I'm going to work remotely and I'm going to work the hours I want to work. And they're happy to have you on board, right? But as Chris was saying earlier, in those kind of cases, it might be a good idea to be that strategic. I don't know, you had a really good way of putting it before, but that person who was a strategic expert on, what'd you call it? You said someone who can pivot really well.
It's you can pivot to a new specialty when you recognize, and I don't want to make this financial because it's not about that. It's that you recognize that there's a specialty that's not only a good fit for you, it's just it appeals to you, but maybe it also builds off what you did previously. So for an example, in our world, being good at the front end today, you can still take a lot of the lessons if you might have adopted Silverlight. Now, look, I picked Silverlight because it's the classic technology that we can point to where a lot of developers bet on it and then felt that they had to move away. Although this is the year when Silverlight goes out of support, it turns out. A little bit of trivia for you. But a lot of developers felt they had to pivot away, right? Did you lose everything you learned about presentation and front end and interacting with developers? I mean, gosh, you might have brought that stuff from earlier desktop based development. It doesn't, those lessons don't. Let's look at a UI specialist. Like, it doesn't matter. So you could have pivoted from that to Angular, or you could maybe today, maybe you're like, yeah, you know what, I'm really interested in Vue. I think it's great. So even though I've done a ton of work in Angular, I'm going to evangelize Vue. I think it can really save. I think teams can be. I'm making this up, by the way. I'm not picking any of these over anything else. I like what I'm seeing, and I think I can help a lot of teams get the most out of this. So,
Well, I think you bring up some interesting points here. So first of all, I 100% agree that you certainly don't, the time you spent on a given technology is not like lost. Like you don't carry nothing forward from that. There are lessons learned. How often do we see one thing that reminds us of something from the past? I mean, like these things come around and around, and I think you really do carry a lot of that forward. I also think, and this is something I would say, like as a hiring manager, that I look for in people. All right. The ability to deep dive into something, to really understand it, to really be, know the ins and outs of it. And I don't mean someone who works on a framework for like 1 month or two. I'm really talking about someone who, let's say you spent, let's just say, and it wasn't around that long, but you spent 10 years solid doing Silverlight, and you knew everything about Silverlight, and you could troubleshoot the hardest of problems, right? And it's gone now. Well, as a hiring manager, I might look at you and say, if I could assess that skill in you, right, I would say, wow, if that person could do that with Silverlight, they seem like a deep dive kind of person. And some developers aren't deep dive kind of people. That's not good or bad. I'm not making a judgment call, but we need some deep dive people, right? And so if you were the deep dive person in one particular area, I have a lot of confidence in your ability to deep dive. And again, we talk about the passion, right? Some people really want to get into it, and it's just the way they operate. When they get to know, they get to use a particular framework or something like that, they really deep dive and they want to understand what makes it tick. And who better to solve problems with it than someone who understands what makes it tick? Who better to deal with the performance implications because they understand the ins and outs, like they really get it. And those people are really valuable on a team, right? So being an expert, taking a deep dive in something, I'm just kind of coming back around to making my final point here is what you were saying is, do you had said, sort of posed the question like, do you just lose all that? And I'm saying absolutely not. I mean, I think it pays dividends for many years to come in so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think emotionally it can be hard to feel like I just got here and now the train is leaving the station. Well, I think you probably know that that's happened anyway. I mean, things that, so we purposely picked a technology stack that is gone. And because of our history with it, we know of developers personally who were very upset about that. But have the languages not changed? I mean, I can, and I know we're kind of a little off topic here, but like I can write a C# application and you can write a C# application and they might look very different just based on the choices you make, right? I could invest a lot more in some of the more modern features, and you could go with you don't have to, and it's still the same language. I'm not trying to pick on C# here. I'm just saying things change. Like SQL has changed. We have features in the SQL language that have changed. The web has changed. Front end has changed.
I think your point is that I think what you're saying here is specialization is great, right? But you need to know when you specialize in something that you need to be prepared.
You need flexibility.
Because you got to be flexible. That's a good way of looking at it. That's a good way of looking at it. This whole thing about, what I was talking about a little earlier really has me thinking as well about, not necessarily being a specialist, but having strengths in certain areas. That's something I particularly look for in the hiring process, right? If I'm hiring, quote unquote, full stack developer, we talked about that a little bit before, what does that mean? But it's nice to know that each of the developers on the team or within the organization have an area that they know really well, right? That they dive into where you're like, you know what? Even if that person's not on a particular team, but they're in the building, we work remotely, whatever, but you know what I mean? In the organization, those are people that we can call on to help us troubleshoot because that person knows something. They're really good at a certain aspect of it. They really, they can help us troubleshoot. And I think it's a good idea to get to know some of what you do. When we say generalist, I don't think that should mean that you don't put emphasis into learning more than a sort of root. Some people think a generalist is like, oh yeah, I can do some of that. I can do some of that. I can do some of that. I'm a generalist, but it's important to understand it. You know what I mean?
So picking something narrower and getting to know it really well The motivation for doing that, though, part of it could be because you think it's fun and interesting. Part of it could be because it was a tough problem at work, and for whatever reason, and there could be a lot of reasons that this happens. It can be because you were closest to the problem and somebody had to solve it. It could be
you didn't want to be a specialist. You just ended up
learning it.
Specialist.
Yeah. Right. That's how I feel about the TLS stuff, by the way. It's like,
I got that.
I'm not trying to say I dislike it. It was just like, look, I didn't set out to understand the 3 things that make that little lock go. And that's my terminology. I didn't set out to understand the difference between server auth and mutual auth. I didn't, sometimes also called client authentication. I didn't set out to understand that. I had to, and it was a tough enough problem that I realized that hardly anybody did, including the vendors we were working with, which was a heck of a challenge, because it's very easy to finger point in that world and say like, well, I don't know, everything's okay over here. How do you tell them like, I promise you it's you? Like, how do you do that? Because that's a hard thing to do in business, right? Like, I promise you I know what I'm talking about, because that's even sounds kind of arrogant, right? So, that was sort of involuntary, but I'm kind of happy that I get it.
Oh yeah, you're better off for it. I mean, you know,
there's a lot that I don't get, you know.
Right.
So,
go ahead. You're still making.
I was going to say there's a lot that I struggle with in the stack that I've spent most of my career working in. Right. Things that I kind of feel like, well, I sort of kind of know how that works, and I sure hope I have a good enough understanding for this code I'm writing, but I don't know. I might be wrong. And is that because I'm too generalist, or just because maybe I haven't had to fight that as much? Maybe I haven't had problems in that area as much, me personally. Hopefully someone on the team or in the org, if it was a big thing, like, can they come in and help real quick? I hope so.
You know, because of abstraction, I'm using that word, you know, very generally here, but because we have layers upon layers of things that make our job easier, everything from the fact that our code is compiled for us into, you know, we don't write machine language, right? I mean, like, we have layers of abstraction of languages. We have tooling, okay? We don't need to be an expert at everything, right? We need to be good. We need to be smart and help and be good problem solvers and things like that. But we don't need. So what you said is like, you know, you kind of hope it's going to work and things like that. That's okay, in my opinion, right? These are all opinions. That's okay, because there's so much to know right now. I mean, you know, we've talked about this on the show before too. Just the interview process alone, the type of topics you need to know to join, let's say, my team. You know, if I'm hiring someone, I'm saying, well, you know, SQL, yeah, okay, good. You know, C#, okay, good. You know, HTML, you know, CSS. You mentioned like Bootstrap. Do you know Blazor? Have you worked with Azure? Are you familiar with app services and that whole model? Okay. Do you know how to do automated deployments? Are you familiar with infrastructure as code? Do you know entity framework, right? Like, I mean, this stuff just keeps piling on. And I don't think it's possible to be, you know, an expert on something. I mean, I always say I don't think I'm an expert on anything, to be honest. Like, some people say, oh, you're an expert on. No, I don't think I'm an expert on anything. But I know that it is not possible to be an expert on everything, and probably not an expert on all those things I just mentioned. But I still want you to be good at them, you know, to get hired, right? So, you know, I don't think, you know, we're saying that people need to be experts at everything, you know, but I think it's, I think, you know, when you become an experienced software developer, you get good at certain things, right? And that's not even language as a framework. That's a certain thing called like problem solving, right? And tinkering, if you will. And you get good at trial and error. You get really good at error, right? And you know, these are the skills that are transferable to all these different ways of doing things. And I think Gosh, I'm not even sure.
So here's the thing. You just rattled off a list of what I'm going to call like technologies, but they were everything from, if you say, hey, do you know SQL? You're asking a few questions there. Some T-SQL. I'm going to say inherently you're asking if they know how to select data. You're inherently asking understanding of things like a where clause. And I bet you even probably are hoping that there's some understanding of joins, at least left joins. That's about where I think you might draw the line.
No, you forgot a little bit of schema, right? How to create a table.
Okay. All right.
I'm thinking, like that. I mean, again, that's what I'm talking about.
So that all got wrapped up into one word. SQL. And I kind of understood you. I kind of did. So here's the great question. This is the hard part. There's a series of boxes you're hoping someone checks, and I would like to believe that you understand that no one's going to check them all, because if they, who does? And furthermore, do they check them in the way that your organization uses them? Because somebody might come in and say like, oh yeah, I've done a lot of SQL Server, and maybe they have just written a ton of triggers and functions. Like, man, I really needed those at this other place. And you're like, we don't use a whole lot of those here. But what gives you the confidence that, hey, this person seems to have the broad understanding that I need to work on our application? I kind of, and then I want to, there's a third part to this, that I feel confident that any missing gaps will be taken care of just by talking with other members of the team or myself, or a little bit of just a little bit of reference, looking things up, boom. And then the third part is, how do you identify that they've specialized and that you're like, hey, I think we might benefit from some of the deep pushes they've made in different spots. I know I asked a lot there, but
yeah, that's a lot. Going back to part of the original thing you were asking, how do you make sure they check all the boxes? Well, they don't have to check all the boxes.
Right.
But let's go back to something we said earlier. Okay. When I was talking about someone who's got the ability to deep dive into something, okay, I look at, let's say there's 10 boxes we want to check. We're talking about check boxes here, 10 boxes. And a couple of those boxes, you really, I know you know it. You know it better than I know it. Like you're really good. And I don't know, I could go to an extreme and say, but you've never written a line of SQL in your life, right? I'm pretty confident you're going to figure it out, because you have the ability to learn all those other things already. You might just not have had time to learn one of those other things. Your old organization might not do those things, right? But you have the ability to learn. And I'm personally going to give a lot of credit for that. Now, the tricky part, it's a balancing act, with time and like how quick can we get someone up to speed when we hire somebody. And so, we are looking for somebody that has a lot of the basics. And that's why I say, it's okay if you're not great in all these areas, but you kind of dabble in them. You know enough to be dangerous, But when I've seen that you really understand some of the things you say you understand, that gives me the confidence to say, well, I use myself as the example, right? I'm not the smartest guy in the world, right? I don't even know if I'm on the upper half on that list, right? But I figured it out, right? And I'm not the expert on it, but I figured it out. So like, if you can do, 9 different, call them disciplines in software programming, and you don't know one of them, and I know 10 of them, I'm like, well, I figured that other one out. Why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you? You would. You might need a little time. You might need a little coaching. You might just need to Google it and then figure it out from there. So that was like the first one you mentioned, right? I think. And you were also talking about
you actually kind of answered it. How?
Yeah.
Because you were able to say, look, this person has showed me that they're able to really understand something maybe even better than I do. So what I'm going to infer from that is that when the time comes to look up how to create a table, even though they couldn't rattle it out on the whiteboard today, which you might not have asked them to do. In fact, Andy, if you told me right now, hey, can you write some SQL to create a table? I bet you I'd probably type create table SQL into the browser just to make sure that I remember, column and then data type and then what comes after that, I don't remember, right?
Is there a comma after each of the rows, or is there not? Who cares? But I always say, who cares?
Exactly.
That's the problem that's going to get solved so quickly. Either IntelliSense is going to give it to you, or you're going to Google it, and within 10 seconds, you're going to have the problem solved, right? So, are you a problem solver? Yeah. That's the thing we want to know. Are you a problem solver? But, again, I feel like I go back and forth on this a little bit because, I'm saying, you don't need to be that good at things. We can Google them. You don't have to be an expert on things, right? But then again, it's good to have some experts on some of these things, right? I mean, someone's answering those questions on, like we said, comes back around to that. Like, if we don't have the experts, who's going to answer those questions online? I was wondering though, Chris, like, what if someone is watching or listening and they're thinking, I'd like to have strength in a certain area, or I'd like to be an expert in something. And again, we're not saying the world's renowned expert. I'd like to be considered an expert in something. If I came to you and said, Chris, I'd like to be an expert in, XYZ, what advice would you give me on how to become that, how to move in that particular direction?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good topic. So I think, it's almost impossible today to be the first expert on just about anything in programming and development. I'm sure that that's not entirely true because, and I'll, somebody once upon a time was the first person to show off a SPA framework of some kind. Like, whether it was anything that we've mentioned tonight or anything that comes in the future, someone was first. And maybe even someone was first to write the base documentation for it. That's trailblazing like no other. You might have been one of the first to market with a course on a popular education platform. That's pretty trailblazer level too. But that's probably not going to ever be me, I don't think. And that's okay. I'm not complaining about that. But if I look back on when I got interested in SignalR, which is an ASP.NET technology that came out when WebSockets weren't quite ready to be everywhere, but we already had other techniques that did WebSocket-like things. It was just hard to manage it all. I said, I really like this technology. I think this is cool. And then when I started playing with it and it seemed magical to me, for me, that was the moment when I said, hey, I want to share this feeling I have right now, that this seems like magic, that things I'm doing in one window are updating in another web browser in real time. Now, granted, that's all on my machine, but it could be my machine and your machine. It could be a machine on the other side of the planet. And this stuff's updating in real time. And we didn't have that kind of experience at one point in the web. Like, that was unusual. Now I feel like it's not unusual anymore, but it was.
That's not the point. But that's not the point.
Yeah. So what did I do?
So
I'm very sample oriented. So I was working on a little sample, and when it got to the point that I thought other people might benefit from it, I said, I think I'm going to try to do this as an hour talk. And just, I think I have enough here that's both familiar but also new, that I don't think it would confuse everybody. And maybe they can walk away and build their own thing that updates in real time, because I think that's cool. And look, I don't have any courses published anywhere or anything, but it certainly was something that I did in our community. So I tried to
teaching.
Yeah, for me, that's for me though, and I want to make it clear that I don't think that's the only way, but it's the one that my brain always goes to is, can I teach this thing that I like to someone else?
Right. So, but there's a little more to it than that, I think.
Yeah, I think there is.
No, I mean, I think you skipped over a part in your own story. I'm guessing you skipped over a part in your own story. In order for you to teach it, what did you have to do first? Like, you knew you liked it, but then what?
Well, I had to make it work, figure out how it worked, learn it in a way, I guess.
Yeah, you put yourself into a position where you needed to learn a little bit more. So did you read, or did you play, or both? Okay.
Struggle.
Did you seek out other experts?
I didn't end up having to, but certainly, like, I didn't actually have to. There wasn't a specific email to anyone or question anyone, but there were moments where I said, man, I don't know what's wrong here. So then I sought out like debugging tips.
Right.
And but no, to your point, in that particular journey, there wasn't ever like a, man, I'm stuck, I'm going to try to email the creators of this, which was an option. That would have been an option.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking about various ways to become to really build up on a certain area. I don't want to really,
it's
not
hard to
about
pick
using the
one.
word like expert.
Yeah.
But let's just use the word expert, right? And there's a couple ideas that come to my mind of ways that people could, if there's, they're thinking, well, I'd like to become an expert at something. So, we often think about, learning, and a lot of people feel like it's my company's responsibility to give me the opportunities and to train me, and other people think it's my own personal responsibility. So let's sort of let's take both of those, right? The first is on your own, right? If you want to become an expert at something, you got to commit to it, I think, quite frankly. And I think you really need to, put your own time into it and really, read up about it, find as many sources as you can read, watch videos, whatever, and do side projects and play around with this technology to really learn it. But there's other ways to do that in the office too, or, I say in the office, I mean, on the job. And, a couple of ideas that came to my mind. First of all, if you have the idea that you want to really get good at something, I would say, talk to your boss about it. See how they feel. They may say, you know what, that thing you want to get good at, we have a bunch of people that do it. I'm using the word it. I'm not even saying what the technology is. We have a bunch of people that can do it. And they're okay with it. But, we could really use someone that is an expert in it. So we'll figure out a way to help you with that, right? And I think it's a good conversation to have with your boss, your manager, whatever, to say, I'd like to specialize in this. And there's a lot of ways that they can help. But I think you can. Another thing that came to my mind, these are all things that I talk to people in my organization about, and for different reasons. But it's funny how a lot of these things come up. There's the same solution to a lot of problems. But share what you know, right? Share what you know with other people. Now, sharing what you know doesn't make you an expert, okay, right? But there's a situation that's going to happen here when you start to share what you know. And that is that you've already got a little bit of jump on some other people because you're solving problems for other people. And maybe you have a Teams channel or a Slack channel at work, and you're throwing out tips for doing it, whatever it is. And somebody says, Chris shares a lot of tips. But Chris, you haven't seen every scenario. You haven't solved every problem yet. You're just sharing some tips. Okay. So, but you got more experience than me. So next time I have a problem, I'm going to be like, I wonder if Chris knows the answer. Now, Chris, let's just say you don't. You haven't solved that problem yet. But I'm going to come to you with a new challenge, one that I can't solve, and you've got more experience than I do. And so now I'm going to maybe hand you that opportunity to learn something else, right? Because you sort of advertised that you are the closest thing we had to an expert, no offense, right? I'm going to give you more challenges on that because I can't do it, and I feel like you can. And you know what's going to happen, Chris? You're pretty good at figuring this thing out. So you're going to go and research that particular example and apply some of the things you know more than I know and be able to solve that problem quicker. And now what happened to your expertise, if you want to call it that? It just grew, right? So you put yourself out there as in a position to, solve problems that you didn't even know how to solve it, right? But you didn't even know that was a problem is my point. Like, How do you become an expert at something if you don't even know all the things that could go wrong to fix, right? Well, now I'm giving you more problems to solve. And so I think there's a lot of ways to sort of become an expert. And you just have to but you have to make it happen, I think is the point. You got to make those opportunities. They're not just always going to just come to you,
What's interesting is you identified. So one thing I was thinking about through a lot of this is that it's hard to find a better teacher than experience. So even when I was tooling around trying to come up with an example for SignalR, it was still just that, an example. And my concern was always that it might be too contrived. Like, does this really solve anybody's problem? And so, however, and you can't sometimes you just don't have those opportunities. Like, if they're not using it at your job, then how do you get that problem that's not yours? I've always felt one of the problems with coming up with my own sample is it's very hard to come up with a sample where I've challenged myself to something I couldn't possibly do, because I don't really know how do you invent that. Sometimes it just happens, you get lucky and you're like, oh wow, there turned out to be a hard problem here. But when someone else is in charge of the problem, now you have to solve it to their satisfaction, and that seems to be when the rubber meets the road, and that's when you really figure out how to use something. And
yeah,
and
that's
so
how you learn how to use something.
So I like what you mentioned about by putting you gave the example of like share some tips. By putting out there in some form, whether it's blog, video, presentation, whatever, who cares? I don't care.
Overflow.
Doesn't matter to me.
Exactly. Right. Any of those ways.
By putting out there that you've tried to learn this thing, and I'll take a different example, is somebody then comes to you with a problem, and what comes out of it, eventually, if you happen to solve it for them, what comes out of it is you go, well, now wait a second, I should add that to my list of things and tips and stuff I teach. Believe me, this has happened, and I'll tell you what it's happened with is Git. Like, no doubt about it. When I started talking about Git, man, I actually shudder to think about some of the things I used to say, not because they were wrong, because they were so rudimentary and elementary, and I think I worry that I led people astray because I knew my way through the forest, but I didn't cut a very good trail. And then I just told people like, yeah, look, let's go walk through the forest. Okay, I hope you're doing all right. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh, what if, and you know what happened was people would start emailing me, start asking me, they say, hey, I'm having a problem. I'm not sure what to do about this. And then that would then I all of a sudden had more interesting opportunities of what could go wrong at work. Because it happened to this person. So I said, yeah, that's happened to me too. I just hadn't thought about it. And now I think I see a clear step, a pattern of how to get out of this problem. I bet you I could share this with a lot of people. When I was at Tech Bash, the conference that you're on the board for the conference in the Poconos, right? I did a talk on Git, and it was a practical viewpoint. The idea was that, listen, I'm not going to pretend to tell you I know every command, because I don't. And I know every little thing about little Git terms like refs and tree-ish, and these are all Git terms that I actually really don't understand that well. But I can practically give you some tips that I think will help you. I think they will. I think they'll not only help you at work, they will help you in your mental model of how this thing works. And what really struck me is that I was getting in the elevator and another guy came in and he had on a Tech Bash lanyard, so I inferred that he was a fellow attendee. And he said to me, "Hey, it was this all very good natured." He said, "Hey, you're the Git guy." And that really hit home. And the reason why it did is because here I am, not feeling like much of an expert. I'm serious. But having shared a few tips that I really do think were helpful to me and I did really believe would help other people. And he'd already decided in his head that I was a specialist. I wouldn't have called myself that. I wouldn't have. I was just like, hey, here's some stuff that helped. And then you kind of realize that, well, wait a second, that's kind of what it is. That's kind of what specialties are. Is some stuff that helps. And you remember it. Right. Your recall on it is pretty good, whether it's mental recall or lookup recall or whatever. And you identify, and when other people have a problem and you look over their shoulder, it doesn't take you very long to say like, yeah, I fought this before too. Is that it? Is that all it takes to be a specialist?
I think that is all it is. I mean, like, go back to your TLS example. You're not the TLS expert.
Oh gosh, no.
You knew more than other people because you dealt with that problem before.
I just have a little head start.
That's a lot of what it is. Some of it's perception. Some of it is imposter syndrome, where we don't even think we're specialists in certain areas, that we have certain information. But often people do. But then again, there's others that just don't. Right? Let's be honest. Some people just don't dive deep into some of these things. Another thing, another good tip I was thinking of too, if you want to become, a specialist at something, join that specialist community, right? So, sort of put yourself in a place where you're starting to know the people that know more than you do, right? Like, I think a good leader at something, a good expert at any particular topic, right? Some of them want to hold that power. They want to be the expert, right? But often that's not really the case, and especially in like technology field and things like that we do. People want to help other people, right? And one way to do that is to scale out, right? You can't answer every problem. You can't solve every problem for everybody. But that's why there's communities for things, right? And so if you're in a community where you can get help, you're like sort of one step closer. Like I've had this situation in my life where I'm like, oh, God, I know some of these people that know a lot of stuff because of the work I've done through community and things like that. I might know some people, and that kind of gives me a little bit of access, right? For whatever reason. And so when someone comes to me with a problem and I can't solve it, I might be able to get to someone that maybe you can't get to, right? Because I somehow, worked my way into that community. And so you get smarter from being around and listening to those people talk. You hang out in the places they hang out. It could be online, reading certain blogs, like follow those people, like, the people that know more than you, learn from them, right? Go out and maybe even get to know them, not a stalkery kind of way, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people are just out there, and then maybe you get access to a little extra information on something, so that could be cool. So, I don't know what's left on.
Well, the last thing is this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I actually don't know that I consider that full stack developer definition as generalism as much as it is a specialty of application development. Because there's something to application development, being able to walk that track from the front end, users interacting here, I mean, there's something you got to know something about this. This isn't, I can know all the web technology in the world, but whenever you build an application, we can think of probably about 5 or 6 things that just about every modern general application has. They almost all have a web front end, and I know not everybody's writing web apps, but there's a lot of web development.
Yeah.
There's a web front end. You write to a data store. You read from a data store. You call other APIs. Maybe you expose APIs. I might have described it, and being able to walk that is a specialty. And I'm not trying to change language here. I'm really not. But there's a training that happened.
Point.
Yeah.
It's hard to define what's a specialty and what's a. This is a big gray area. All right, we were kind of getting there earlier too. I agree with you. That's a specialty. It depends on what your context is. If you want to talk about the context of, oh wow, we're getting rated with a party of 143. Holy moly, we are here. Wow, cyber insecurity.
Oh, cyber insecurity. Hey,
people.
Good to see you.
Wow.
Welcome everybody. We were talking about specializing versus generalizing as a developer, and it's great to see cyber insecurity again. He rated us a little while back, and you know what? It's always an active crowd, and look at the chat with tons of awesome emotes, right?
Holy moly. Yeah.
That's cool stuff, man.
These people are having fun.
Yeah.
We were just talking about, so we're, and thank you for the raid, and thank you for
those
of you who are here. And the narwhals are here. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. Hey guys. So we were just talking about, the value of specializing versus the value of being a generalist in software. And you could really relate this conversation to almost any topic, wouldn't you think, Chris? So we were just saying, what does it mean to specialize? If you want to talk about in the entire software world, right, or programming world, well, specializing might be I'm a web developer, right, or I'm a, machine language developer. I'm a security expert and site, But then again, within that area, we could say, oh, I'm an expert in web development. Well, but in web development, there are specialties right there. It just becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. It really depends on the context,
Right. So I think, like I was, we were kind of considering that a lot of times you even said, as somebody who's hiring for teams, that you don't necessarily just want to hire. You maybe can't afford, and I don't mean this in a financial sense, you can't afford to hire somebody who is too narrowly specialized because you just don't have, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth here, but there just really might not be enough for that person to do. That's one reason. But another reason is just, as I talked about, I think there's something to being able to thread that track from front end to back. And maybe sometimes we call those people architects. I don't know. That was a point that we never really got to is an architect, a software architect, your classic generalist?
Maybe.
Or is it just someone who can research just enough on a lot of different things that they can start to drop them like puzzle pieces? I think this is good for our organization, right?
I'm seeing some good comments in here, by
I think
the
so
way.
Too.
Right off the bat, BSEC676 said, development equals hacking. Well, we're all hackers, I think, to some part. Lexi, I can't even say that. Cypher, Lexia Cypher.
Maybe Lexia Cypher, I think.
Yeah, Lexia Cypher says, makes sense. You want jack of all trades. Sometimes so we've been talking about this. Sometimes a jack of all trades is a great thing, right? But Callie Beefcake says, the more you know, the more you're worth, right? But the better you are, the more you are worth. So sort of go hand in hand, right? So it's sort of the pros and cons. I don't think what we've sort of been getting at in this conversation is to catch up a whole bunch of people that just joined is there's not really a one answer. There's not a one answer to this, right? But we've been trying to get, some ideas about, what other people think. And so what do you guys think about this topic? Do you think it's better to be a specialist or a generalist? Do you think, there's just, and how do we do that? There's a lot of ways to think about this. And by the way, if you're new to our show, Chris, I'm just going to take a quick second here and say, hey, if you're new to our show, by the way, this is what we do. We talk about all kinds of topics for software developers, right? I know a lot of people just jumped in, a little bit of a commercial for who we are. Sometimes we have live coding. Sometimes we have guests that do demos. Sometimes we just talk about things. The Dev Talk Show, we're talking about topics that are interesting to developers and all kinds of topics, right? Yeah. So what do you have on the screen here? You have this thing called T-shaped engineer.
Yeah, I've had this queued up for a little while, and I didn't know if it would come up tonight. So one of the things that I think I try to do, or we both do, is we settle on a topic, and then I might look for what other people think in the world, right? And I kept coming across the concept of T-shaped, and that really goes along with one of the comments here. Jack of all trades, master of none, better a jack than a master of one. So that's what this article goes into. Is the saying goes, a jack of all trades, master of none, right? If you try to narrow everything down as to engineers, developers being generalist or specialist. So there was this concept of the T-shaped engineer, and this doesn't just go for software development. The idea that you have a broad knowledge of maybe the overall topic, but still cut in deeply into certain areas, which we didn't use this term, but you said this when you talked about wanting to see that a developer you actually appreciated seeing somebody had dove into certain areas because it gave you the confidence that they either were the type of person who would be flexible enough to deeply understand new things that are important to you now, will be important to you in the future, but at the same time could be a value add for the team in areas where maybe they don't already have that knowledge. So this was earlier in the show when we were talking about, a specialty and people who really might drill in a little bit more than saying, hey, I'm not sitting here consulting or working or teaching or presenting about the entire application. I'm really focused in on this one part of it. And we know people do that. We know people maybe are the first to write the course on accessing data, and that's just what they focus on. They're not going to write the whole thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that person couldn't be part of an application team.
Yeah, I like this. I didn't know I hadn't seen that phrase before, this T-shaped developer, but I like this a lot as a person who does the deep dive. And I would say, if you can deep dive in one topic, then I know you have that ability. You have that skill, that ability to go deep on a topic and to learn more. And I know that if there's a problem coming up in another area that you don't have that deep dive in, you're going to be able to go in there and figure it out. And and I think that's really valuable, right? I'm looking at some of the comments in here.
Yeah.
Like Mac Attack Hacker says, a dev generalist is like a purple teamer in cybersecurity. Now I think I'm familiar with a blue and red teamer, solution architect who knows back and front end. So I've never heard of a purple teamer. I've never actually heard that phrase, but I think I can kind of get what that is a little bit, right? As someone who sort of, sits in between, maybe isn't the expert on both, but knows some of both, right? Knows front and back end in this case, a solution architect, right? So, it's interesting because this conversation is one that you could argue has almost nothing to do with software development, or because this, could we have the same conversation if we worked at an ad agency? And that actually brings up a thought that I had earlier that I didn't bring up. We talked about specialization and generalization and how the scope of it, the context matters for how you consider yourself a specialist. How about being a specialist in a problem domain or in a business? In other words, I am a developer for a bank, or I am a developer for, or sort of financial institutions, or I'm insurance, and it could be medical. It could be all these different sort of topics, right? And how does that play into like specialty? Because that's a whole other way of looking at it,
People
right?
do that. People. So, in fact, you might argue that I've gotten closer to being one of those people. But there are folks, for example, in my past, I worked in healthcare IT exchanging clinical information. And it turns out there are data formats and standards for doing so. Like HL7 is extremely popular. And then other formats have been created over the years. IHE was created over top of SOAP, which of course I'm throwing out acronyms here, but because I don't really want to dive too deep into them. But the key is it doesn't take long to live. You live in that domain. And even though you're a developer, you start to understand some of these terms, industry terms like providers and labs. And, oh, you know what? Yeah. HL7, you ship a lab over and it might contain this clinical information. And it'll have the provider's name. And you're like, provider, what's that provider term mean? Oh, well, it turns out that's like an industry term. It could be a doctor. It could be when I worked in commercial loan analytics, when I worked in commercial loan analytics, it took a little while. I was working on the reporting side, right? And then finally one day I'd had enough and I really wanted to know what a takedown was. Cause this was a cool sounding term, man. Like, takedowns, like this commercial loan stuff, it sounds like this gets exciting, like there's action, because to me a takedown is like a wrestling term. but that's when, so I asked somebody, I said, I just want to know what this is. And they were they were overjoyed. This was someone called a business analyst, so turns out they were a former loan manager, so that's how they knew the business domain, right? It was super excited to explain it to me that like, oh, well, the line of credit is called the facility. That's how much they're able to borrow. And a takedown is when they actually they actually are getting some of that facility, some of that line of credit to use. That's a takedown. And I was like, oh, man, I was imagining like a tackle and all these things. And I don't mean to make light of it other than to say I worked in that business long enough to start learning the terms, So now am I becoming specialized?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways you are, right? Again, this is like kind of weird, a different take on specializations, but when you're a hiring manager, that like if I need to get you up to speed on all the terminology, well, that's an advantage that I don't have to do if you know that before. But then again, I don't think you need to be in an industry, right? I think some people really try to stay within it.
Yeah.
I guess it really depends, right? And statute.net here had a comment a ways back saying that, and Statue's a friend of the show, was a guest at one point, said there's definitely something, an identity that comes with writing software within specific domains and relatedly. And yeah, I think that's true. And I think, it's interesting how maybe this is part of the motivation for specialization, right? Is that we're motivated by identity somehow, right? Like having an identity. Oh, you're the one who's great with front end, or so and so, she's so good at managing servers, or like whatever the topic is. We want an identity. So and so, oh, he's a great person in whatever the topic is. It doesn't matter, and that is kind of an interesting motivator. It's not about this like fame or something like that, right? I'm trying to overinflate it, but like, what happens when we meet somebody? What's usually the first question that what do you do?
Yes,
right?
Yes, I know.
It's like, we identify as that.
Yeah.
Thing. And so, so specialization sort of, I think kind of helps with that a little bit. There's a really good comment in here. I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit.
That's okay.
But Ricardo Alfredos we have, this is an example of a comment where we have practical, like actual example. This is sort of like data, right? You know, Ricardo is providing some very specific stuff. As someone who is currently in several interview processes, I get asked very often, which is my specialty? And I can tell employers get more excited if one is specialized in something. So I'm curious to know from all the other people on there, and we're not trying to throw Ricardo under the bus, you know, do people agree with that? Do people disagree with that? And I'm sure there are examples of both, right? I'm sure there are. But there you go. Is being a specialist something that is going to, you know, get you in the door? And one of the premises we made earlier, and anyone else that wants to jump in on this, you know, please feel free in the comments to jump in on along with this, their thoughts on this. But I always like someone who is not completely a generalist, but not completely a specialist either, right? Someone that is that jack of all trades. That phrase was used earlier in the chat, but knowing that they can deep dive in certain areas. Like as a hiring manager, I think like, wow, that's a good person to have around. You know, I might look at, you know, Ricardo and say, oh, Ricardo is really good at that one thing like that. He's going to add value to the team, right? You're looking at like, what's the value add? Why do I want to hire this person? Then that takes us back to the degree of specialization that we're talking about. Are you again, using catchphrases, are you a one-trick pony? Or are you a jack of all trades? Or are you somewhere in the middle, right?
Right. And so when it comes to like why he says, I can tell employers get more excited. I'm trying to think of the different pivot points on that, because look, we're unpacking a lot out of that comment.
Sure.
If by specialty, does it mean, and I guess I'm partially posing this question back, but I think there's some different pivots here. By specialty, does it just mean that you have a great story about how you solved a particular problem that was a little bit more than just, well, you know, we had a web page and it talked to some web APIs and that went to some database and then we returned, you know, and then we built the list and then the report went out. I mean, when you have, and I admit this sort of borders a little bit on the effective interviewing, right? When you have a story about how you did something, almost always that story is going to mean drilling into a problem a little bit more narrowly than just the base usage of the platform. Like, I don't care what development stack you're on, what tools you're on top of what, front-end framework to middle tier frameworks to databases to web API type frameworks, doesn't matter. You probably had to solve some unusual problem. And that demonstrates expertise. But more importantly, it demonstrates that, hey, it demonstrates a lot of the things we talked about in other shows too. Here's a problem solver. Here's somebody who sticks with it until they get it. Flexible enough to learn and figure things out, because how many times do we have to just figure something out we've never done before? I mean, isn't that the crazy thing about this business, is that it doesn't matter how much experience you have in it. You go to start something new and there is something you've never done before. Like, it's just always been that way. So I guess part of me is wondering if I can tell employers get more excited if one is specialized. It's funny because most of the time the job recs don't say that. It might say nice to have. It might say
interesting,
right?
Yeah.
Nice to have experience in commercial loan analytics. I'll use my own example. Nice to have experience with healthcare clinical data, but it's always an option because they figure they're not going to find that person. They'll have to teach them the business domain. Most of the time you think that. But don't the job recs usually, aren't they? I mean, the job recs are general.
Well, I mean, they're not always, right?
No, I agree. They're not always.
Yeah, but very often they're sort of general, right? And I get excited when someone has a particular specialty, especially if it's something that I know that like our team, you know, could use that. And sometimes it comes up as, you know, as an example. Now, in Ricardo Alfredo's case, I'm not sure what that specialty is. Feel free, if you're still around, to plug that in, and we could maybe it's relevant, to the example. Maybe it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, maybe not.
But when I hear about a candidate that can bring something to the table, specialty is that you're bringing something to the table that someone else doesn't have usually, and that can be a real asset to a team in order to be able to get things done faster, or to problem solve, or to preventative measures, or whatever it is we're looking to do. There's I think I agree. Like, I do get excited when I hear that someone has a specialty, assuming it's a specialty we need, of course, right? Let's go along with that caveat. I'm assuming in this case it's something that is needed, right? No, I agree. To me, it's a differentiator. We're gonna, at the end of the process, we're gonna say, well, we interviewed these 5 candidates, right? And what do they bring to the table? And how are they alike? How are they different? And we got to choose one. We can only choose one of them. So how are we going to choose? And a specialization, or we could again, definition of the word specialization is a little bit of a gray area, but certainly having a strength in a particular area, right, can be really, really helpful for the team, for productivity and things like that. Now, it comes back to the whole thing, well, how specialized is too specialized? Right? If that's the only thing you can do, I don't know. I mean, then I guess I would hope that if they really needed, just the job rec would be specific if they only needed someone that could do that one thing, right? So I think usually they're more general. Like you said, job recs are general, but when I see, there's 10 things listed, we list 10 things that you need to be able to do. If you can do 10 of them, but you're really good at one, that's a beautiful thing, I think. Yeah, here's a good comment. I only read the beginning of it. Kiersas Vergiana, and I'm terribly messing that up. I apologize. Specialty shows long-term dedication to a trade, and I like that. I'm a general landscaper. If I specialized in tree work or retaining walls, I would charge at least 3 times in my current rate. But the skills I'm using now are helping me master the specialized skill.
We talked about that, about how there is, this whole conversation was not meant to be about financial benefit, but that there is that in that. And I love this example outside of software development, that by becoming known, or even just saying, hey, I expertise, wow, where did that English come from? I'm an expert in this smaller thing, but I really know it well, that financially you can charge more often. You're consulting, maybe that's one angle. You could be the person that knows a particular language pretty well, or maybe a platform, or maybe a framework, and you know it real well. And so when there's an organization that's like, hey, we just really need more expertise in this, you know what we should do? We should see if this person is available. And how do you know that they're an expert in it? Well, in the modern age, it might be because they're on YouTube, or they're on an educational platform, or they have a popular blog, or maybe a popular podcast. I'm not sure. But you begin to associate those people as the experts. And man, when you're sought out for a skill, your rate naturally goes up. I think it's just life. That's not trying to say that the only reward here is financial, because there's more to it than that. Right.
But let's play the flip side of that.
Yep.
I certainly agree that your rate can go up, right? When word on the street says that someone put in that retaining wall, that we had somebody do it once before and it was junk, and now we had the expert come in and really build that retaining wall, and it it held up, it didn't crumble, or whatever the case is. Now you've got that reputation, right? And that can build. The flip side of that, and I'm certainly not discouraging specialization, I think we kind of said earlier, there's also, though, sometimes there's generalization in job security, right? When the trend comes and goes, and Chris, you had a great answer to this back when we talked about it earlier. But you could say, oh, I got really good at heck, we can use landscaping because a lot of us are familiar with that as well, right? I'm getting paver work done, right? And I got really good at doing like a wet bed for my pavers. I'm making this up. I don't do that, but we're doing wet bed, and I'm the expert in that. And then 2 years later, I don't think this is going to happen, but like wet bed goes out of fashion, and I'm like, oh, well, I only knew the wet bed technique. I didn't know, how to do a just basic, sand underneath or something like that. Probably a stretch of an example here. But how do you balance that situation where, you are still qualified when the trend changes?
Yeah, right.
You could be a carpenter and, you get really good at like building with, I think there was a trend for a while, I think, with like aluminum studs. I don't know if this really even would be a real example, but wow, I was great with those aluminum studs, but they went out of fashion, so now I'm out of work or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I think you could transfer your skill back to wood, but just trying to think of how it kind of applies to these decisions apply all over the place, and there's not really a right or a wrong answer.
I mean, certainly, so folks need a job, right? Like there's a practical side of this is you need to work. And so I think there's a natural human fear. I'm going to say that if I'm not keeping up, or if what I'm working on goes away, and I especially see a lot of newer developers, maybe they're on their first job. I see that they get nervous that what they're working on doesn't apply anywhere else. Like This is the only thing I could ever do now because, I think my friend would be, I'm not going to use his name, but I think my friend would be okay with me describing a scenario, is that after learning the front end at a coding like boot camp and doing a lot of work, somebody took a chance on him, except that, like you said earlier, there's really not very many jobs where all you're really going to be asked to do is just do, in the web space, just do the HTML, CSS, and that's all you got to do. So what happened? He started learning the back end. I'm going to use that term broadly, and that happened to be PHP and Symfony. And what he got really nervous about it is he's like, well, does that mean I feel like I'm going to be stuck with PHP and maybe it's dying and whatever? And it's like, nah, listen, did you go in knowing it? No, but you've already shown that you have the flexibility and wherewithal to pick up the uniqueness at a job, because no two are alike. Like even two places that call themselves Python shops, or two places that call themselves .NET shops, in the end, you get in there and start working with what they're doing things differently. Maybe not drastically different, but different enough. If I came to work with you next week, Andy, I am positive there would be parts that I would say, like, I've never done that. That's interesting. I've never seen that done that way. And it's so hard. It sounds so contrived when I say it this way. But it's okay to say, hey, I really like, I'm really enjoying Python, so I think I'm going to dive in. I'm really enjoying C#, so I think I'm going to really get to know Blazor well. And then, you might go look for another opportunity in that area, and pretty soon you will seem like that expert. But the key is you're flexible enough to be able to pivot and stay just enough ahead. I think what I said is, how much of a head start do you really need to be of value to someone else? And the key is that you're enough of a specialist that what you know is new to the rest of that team and the rest of that org. So
and I'm wondering, I've seen in some of the comments across the show, like comments that mention recruiters. And I'm thinking a little bit about the system that we're in. Again, a lot of times specializing, we're putting it in the context of like, well, what happens when you want to get another job, or you're, trying to grow your career. And so there's a system, and the system includes hiring managers, it includes recruiters, It includes candidates, right? This whole system. And, probably the system is broken to some degree because of the way we undervalue someone. Like, let's say they were a Python developer and we want to bring them on to do C# work or something like that. Or do we undervalue them or do we not? Like, I don't know if we're making the correct assessment. Some would argue, hey, that person is smart and they learn, like, I learned this language, they learned Python, why wouldn't they be able to learn C# or whatever the example is, right? The other thing in the system here that is we have to be careful for, and I'm kind of throwing this out as a big topic, like, do we think the system is broken or not? But, recruiters sometimes are very focused on the openings that they have at the time and not necessarily what's the best opening for the candidate, And so they may say, oh, you should advertise being less full stack or more full stack or more specialized or less, whatever it is, because they sort of know maybe what's out there, but that might not be right for you. So as a big question, or as a big topic I'm kind of throwing out here, how does the system, I'm trying to get my air quotes in here small enough here, how does the system play into this?
Right.
I don't know.
And it fails us in a lot of ways, right?
Right.
You think about the average posting that usually focuses on technical skills and length of time as though that's how it works. Because I gotta say, it's just not how it works. Right. And then, unfortunately, there are people who, for a variety of reasons, some people will look at, let's just say every job posting has 6 requirements, who will feel that with 2 of them, they're happy. I think I cover 2 of them, I'm going to apply. I think I cover none of them, I'm going to apply. There are those kinds of folks. And then there are, I don't cover all 6, so I'm not going to apply. I'm not qualified. I wouldn't get the job. And what's unfortunate there is there's just as much variability in the hiring as there is in that too. So that very well may be that hiring manager may look at it and say, no, I do want somebody that checks these boxes. But how many times has that really just not been true? That's just this ideal person that probably doesn't exist anyway. And when you get them in and you recognize, as the hiring manager, you recognize this person is smart, they get work done, and more importantly, looks to me like even though they cover some of the stuff, so I have things I can give them on day one. I'm confident there's work that I can give them on day one. It's not a total fish out of water scenario, but yes, there is going to be some learning. But I've become confident through this process that's not going to be a problem. And those people, if they don't have the confidence to hire to go ahead and apply for that job, we miss out on them.
Right. I've given feedback to like junior developers over the years. Often the same advice. When they're always like, I can't apply for that job, I don't have all the skills. I'm like, no. Right. You're totally missing it. You have some of the skills, right? I mean, if you have none, that's a stretch. Okay. Mm-hmm. You've got some of them. Irasake is a big fan of some of the things you've been saying, Chris. And yeah, you get these ridiculous requirements that are posted. And so, but people need to understand, I think, that, I post jobs that have a lot of, maybe we don't call them we should be really careful to separate out like required skills and optional skills. And it gets really tricky. I try to list optional skills, but I try to explain to recruiters that we're working with at any given time, like in this list of optional skills, I would like them to have some of those optional skills, but I don't expect them to have all of them, right? And again, we know that people are going to bring other skills along that we might not have even listed. They're going to have additional skills They're going to have strengths. It all comes back to this. If you could learn, if I have 10 things on a list and you were able to learn 9 of them, right? Well, then of course you'll learn the 10th one. Like you're going to learn it, right? It's like, most of the time, none of these are so much more complicated than the other requirement, right? Maybe there's some that are really specialized and you have certain situations where you need to say something's a requirement. But we really got to be careful with how we advertise jobs, with how we recruit, and with how we hire. Because I guess you said it, like we're missing out on opportunities sometimes to bring in good bring in good people,
because they select themselves away from that opportunity, right?
Right. So here's a comment. Let's talk about this one, Chris. I don't know if you see this one from Throne of Graves. I haven't even read the whole thing yet. I saw the first sentence, and
too small on feature chat there. If you're watching on the stream, that is some small text, so we'll read it aloud.
Yeah. Okay. I just graduated college doing web and app development, and I feel like there is no way I could actually be good enough to apply for a job because I've had so many languages and technologies crammed down my throat and no time to actually learn it. Well, that's interesting too. Let's come back to that. I regret going to the school and wished I picked one tech stack and learned on my own rather than learn 6 languages at once, literally. Well, first of all, this is a great comment, right? Because now we're back at an example where some of us were hypothesizing. Thanks
for that practical example. Yeah.
Practical example.
Yeah.
Right. With a couple of really good bits that we could break out of this. So I don't know, Chris, we could start at the beginning of this, right? Just graduated college doing web and app development. I feel like there's no way I could actually be good enough to apply for a job. So let's just stop right there. Let's do a hard stop and say wrong, right? I'm sorry, I'm going to call you out. Wrong. You are going to be good enough, right? Like companies, when we hire people that are less experienced, we come into that knowing that they're going to be less experienced, right? You're not applying for a senior job, right? And I just want to start right there with a sort of hard stop and say, I'm sorry, I think you're wrong. Now, I'm saying that as a hiring manager. I mean that in a positive way, like not in a negative way. Like you're wrong. You are going to be good enough to do the job. We just have to figure out, like, how do we get there? What is the right job for you and things like that. But depends on, the stack. Now, then and Chris, I don't know, am I giving wrong advice there? I mean, I was being a little drastic by saying flat out no. Yeah.
I think it's just the encouragement that I'm sure it's daunting to get the first job. I mean, I don't want to go into this too deeply, but I've always told people after you get your second job, then you're a developer, and that's like a whole other show right there. But I feel like the reason is because now you have a resume and boom. But getting the first job is daunting. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I don't mean to discredit the feeling. By the way, Throne of Grace, I was scared, S-less. Like I just couldn't believe it. Like, oh my God, and I always had this feeling like I'm useless. They're going to hire me, and they're going to find out I'm a fraud in the first place. I don't know anything.
But you've graduated. I'm going to go ahead and assume that there was a curriculum there that was pretty complete. Although one thing, man, if there's one thing about computer science curriculums probably around the world, is I'm not sure any two are alike because they pick platforms, they pick languages. It sounds like in this case, perhaps these professors valued a broad look at languages and platforms, whereas others don't value that. I only speak from experience, and it goes a ways back, is that in the Cal State system, the university chose a platform, and it was a big deal to change it. Like, it was a big deal. And sometimes it took them so long to change it that they're teaching kids Ada in the early 90s when wow, I don't know. Even then, even then it was I don't know. But so that's the first thing is that they're different. I'm just going to acknowledge that, as I don't know what the value was there or why or whatever. But let's to talk about that specific regret. Like, I wish I would have picked one stack. So that kind of goes back a little bit earlier to when I said we considered a full stack developer a generalist. And in fact, that blog post about being a T-shaped engineer calls a full stack developer a generalist. And I tried to have the hot take that, I don't know, man, the ability to go from front end and know how to take that and write to a database and then expose an API, to me, there's a specialty there. That's the stack, right? Whether you pick something with a fancy acronym like LAMP, or whether you say the general .NET stack, which we would all basically assume is, you're going to write some C# and you might be going back to heck, in a lot of cases you're going back to a SQL server, or maybe you're going to cloud or something. Yeah, being good at one of those stacks and being able to solve problems in it is a good start, because at the most basic fit will be lining up the job opportunities that line up directly with those technologies. That's the easy fit. That's level A, I would say. But I still think there's a level B of nothing's ever a perfect fit, because I don't care. I could have, in my college program, I could have written an application using language A on operating system B, deployed to cloud C using frameworks D, E, and F. And then I go to a job that does those exact same things, and they don't use them the exact same way.
Right.
Which doesn't mean my experience is wasted.
Right.
It just means I still got something to learn.
Right.
And the smart hiring managers, the good ones, understand that every person you hire, I don't care who they are, there is some delta between where they're at and where you are, and you're going to bridge that gap, maybe learning from them and them picking up what you're doing.
Yeah, and also, I think it's good advice. Regarding the 6 languages that Throne of Grave learned, a little tough to know exactly what, there's a lot, there could be a lot of things there. But when you go into an interview, you feel like, you're saying, they crammed all this stuff down your throat and stuff like that. But you also learned 6 languages. And whether or not you're a master of one of them, use the fact that you learned 6 languages as a selling point. When they say, well, are you, if they challenge you that you don't know, maybe you didn't get one of the questions right about one of those languages. You'd say, right, but I know 5 other languages. So think about what I could do in this organization if I focused in one area, right? And how quickly I'm going to grow, and how quickly I'm going to grow into this role and learn the things that we need to do and things like that. You have to turn those into strengths in an interview process. Might not always be the easiest thing to do, but
I like where you're going, though. I like where you're going, because I want to try and figure out, how do I say that? What's the best way for me to say that to you? It's almost like what you're trying to say. Is this right? That what you're trying to say is, hey, I had a job to do, and I did my job, which was to learn these different items to get my degree. And I think when I focus on your work, I'll be able to drill in on the work that this organization needs to do. And it won't be about 6 languages. It'll be about the platforms used here. Like, how do I say that so that the hiring manager goes, yeah, you're right, that's a strength, not a weakness?
I think the way you just said it was a good way.
Is that pretty good? Okay.
Right?
Well, I want to make sure.
Yeah, I think there's other ways. Another way would maybe be like, they give you a problem and you can't solve it with whatever the question that they asked you about. You say, it's funny though, I do know how to do that. God, I don't know how to do that with C#. I can do that with Ruby. I know that's not what you're asking me, but I could show you how to do it there. And they might be like, wow, that's interesting. Because listen, one of the things that we want as hiring managers, and that that companies should want, are smart people, right? We look for a few things. Generally, I try to use certain sort of pillars of hiring, right? There's a few pillars of hiring. One is do you want to work with them? I mean, I'm just going to be blunt, right? Like, being good in the interview and getting along, like, okay, this person's going to be good to have around the office or on the team. The other one is, are they smart, right? And can they solve problems? Like, these are like a couple of pillars. Are they smart? If they're smart, then they can learn the next thing that they need to learn. Chris and I were talking earlier about how, you know, we Google things, right? Like, people Google things. That's okay. You don't have to know the ins and outs of every language, right? If you know the concepts that you can apply and then go and find maybe the details or the example online, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of times people in the early stages of their career are embarrassed to say maybe that they Google things and they look for answers online. Let me tell you, I do that all the time. And in an interview, if I ask somebody, I mean, a silly example, but if I said to you, what's 1 + 1? And you said 2, and 2 + 2 is 4. And I said, what's 6 + 6? And you're like, oh God, I don't know. I got to Google that, right? Okay, you understood the concept of math. You showed me you knew the basics of it, but the ones and the twos, and you Googled it. That's okay, right? Because you went, and again, it's a very silly example. Try coming up with these things off the top of your head sometimes. But the point is, you showed that you had an understanding of the concepts and things like that. The details, it's okay. And so that shouldn't be something, it's just another side piece of advice that a beginner shouldn't be afraid to, like, Chris and I are experienced developers. I'm sure other people on the channel tonight right now are experienced. Like, we all do those kind of things. We all look things up, right?
Well, let's just talk about, I was saying, for example, that even today, after many years, just because I don't do this every day, if I had to create a table in a database, I might have to go quickly Google it. And what is the things that I'm trying to remember? Well, I'm trying to remember the syntax. I'm also trying to remember where do the data types go? Are they first? Are they second? Do I put the identifiers like in some kind of brackets or something? How do I declare whether the field's nullable or not? And if it's an identity type field? Now, hold on a second. If somebody said that to me in an interview, everything I just said, and they told me, they said, I don't think I have the syntax right, but I'd have to go look these things up. You just said the 5 or 6 things you had to know you had to know about whether a field's nullable and what the data type is. So I'm now confident. I'm totally confident that you understand the topic. You just didn't have the exact syntax recall at your fingertips. Well, so what? Neither do I.
Yeah. We can't cram all this information into our heads. Like,
yeah,
we just can't, right?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is, and I appreciate like Throne of Graves, I hope that our perspective helps, because I do think understanding the other side of the table, as it were, helps. I do want to just tell you, it's an unfortunate fact of life that everyone is human, and unfortunately some people on the other side of the table are just maybe not as open-minded, or they just, and maybe you don't want to work there, right? But hey, I know we all need a job. So easy for me to say. I love that answer a lot of times. It's like, because that happens a lot. You will see that answer a lot on different boards and different forums where they say, sounds like you didn't want to work there. Still not getting me a paycheck, right? It's still want a job. So I understand that frustration. I totally get that. But we all fear, I think it's fair to say that we all fear that eventually people are going to find out you're a fraud in this industry, because I think we just flat out assume that everybody knows everything, including the people around us, including probably me and Andy with each other. And imposter syndrome is a real thing in life, and it seems to hit hard in software development. I don't know if it's because we're in this, but sometimes I feel like it hits harder than almost anywhere else, and that's probably not true.
Well, one of the reasons why I think it hits so hard in our industry is because our industry changes. Again, I'm in this industry, so I don't know every other industry, right? But I think it changes faster than other industries. Other industries change. I understand that. If you're an attorney or you do taxes, every year there's new codes, and certainly there's changes to the law and things like that you have to stay up with. but I don't think they're fundamental job changes that often. Whereas we are often learning things, tearing it down and learning from the ground up again, a new technology or a new thing like that. And I do think it's different. If you're in banking, maybe, you're going to have that job and, or you're just doing like ledger accounting, right? And I'm not dismissing accountants. I love accountants. I love everybody, right? But like, I think that they do their job and they, next year they're doing the same job. They may have some new challenges and things like that. And hopefully they're motivated and inspired and they're helping people with different things, but their fundamental job about like, let's say you're a bookkeeper and you have like, the expenses, debits and credits and things like that, right? That's what it's going to be the same somewhat, I think, year after year. Whereas with our job, it just keeps changing. There's always something new. There's always something new to learn. There's always, whole new, like, look, we just went through the, sort of the cloud revolution or something like that. Like, what? Are you kidding me? I knew how to use servers and I knew how to deploy applications, and now the whole thing shifted. I mean, that is a monumental change, right? Like, I don't know. I am sure there are other industries that change a lot. I don't know what they are, but I am sure there are industries that change a lot. But a lot of them don't change to the degree that ours does. And I think that lends to imposter syndrome, because we're always chasing this, like we can't get to the end. Like you can't learn it all. You can't know all these things. Like because the amount of things you need to know is growing exponentially, like each year, each day. Oh my gosh, this is interesting. There's a couple of really good comments here. Miguel RM, I talked with a friend, he is a doctor, and he told me that sometimes he searched on Google how to perform specific procedures like surgeries a day before to execute it. So yeah, I guess everybody has to do some research. I also liked, we could jump back one to Wolfgang Blitz's comment. It says in the book, the ideal team player, smart, humble, and hungry. This kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about, interviews. And I think there was a comment even earlier, scrolling back here from, where was it? Someone had said something about, enthusiasm is overlooked. I don't know if it's Iris Sakai or Iris Sakai or something like, yeah, right. Being able to learn, being enthusiastic, being passionate is really important in an interview. And I think that goes to the hungry part of the comment from Wolfgang Blitz, right? Smart is something I had mentioned before, right? If you're smart, you're going to be able to figure it out. If you're hungry, you have a passion for it. Humble isn't something that, I had mentioned. I don't think we've talked about that on the show, at least in this topic. Well, we have a little bit. We've talked about where, it's okay to say you don't know how to do something, right? Maybe that falls under humble in this case, but I do think, certainly I didn't write the book or anything like that. I do think that those are that's a good way to look at it. Smart, humble, and hungry as, sort of like pillars for what you would be looking for in people. And none of that in there on that ideal team player says, 8 years of experience.
Yeah, I know.
Right. I didn't see that listed there.
8 years, right?
I didn't see already knows how to solve every problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love
That's
how
covered under smart and hungry.
I love how after so many years of service in a programming language, like now, not a day before, man, it is 3+ years, I guess. Because
well, how many times have you been asked the question, how many years does it take to become a senior developer or something like that?
I know.
Yeah.
Right. These terms, junior, senior, are pretty rough too. But so
yeah, that's right. They are rough.
Yeah. But when it comes to talking about, I think Throne of Graves brought up a really good example that sort of ties together we spent a lot of tonight talking about like what does it mean to specialize, and then is it bad to? And I kind of tried to make the case that I don't think a real software specialist is. I think the folks that we maybe look up to that we recognize are software specialists, if we really think hard and they've been doing this long enough, we can probably think of previous specialties. So they're the kind of folks who pivot and move and change, and they recognize that, hey, something is coming out that I kind of like, and I think it has a lot of business value or a lot of value to me. And I don't necessarily know it, but I know I've been evangelizing and presenting and talking about something similar. So I'm going to start shifting over to that. And I don't necessarily know that strategy is like it's super strategic. I think sometimes it's natural. A person just gets super excited. Someone who has been espousing, let's talk about an old web technology, jQuery. I mean, remember when jQuery was being pitched as the way, and look at what this is going to do. It gets you cross-browser compatibility, and you can quickly find elements you're looking for on your page. This stuff was pitched as selling points, back in the day, and certainly someone could have really specialized in that and done very well, and then recognized that, hey, I think the future is frameworks that are more opinionated than just grabbing the elements on the page. I think this is when kind of Angular was coming out. I think this Angular thing, I think this idea of an opinionated, complete client-side framework, I think this is a thing. So you become passionate about it, and now you go be the expert in that. I don't know that it's always strategic. I think sometimes it is that you just like it. You're just like, this is cool.
Yeah.
Maybe you're fortunate enough. Now, see, sometimes specializations come out because you got to specialize in it at work. Your boss said, hey, I think this thing is cool, and we're going to check this out. And maybe it wasn't even your boss. It might have been you. Or someone on your team sort of gets a prototype going, and other people get excited about it. And next thing you know, you're becoming a specialist in this other framework or technology or thing. But I do think that there is something to be said for learn the pattern for how to build on. If you want to be an application developer, and certainly there's a lot of job postings for what are really application developers, that they're out there. And today you don't really know the deployment end of it. See what you can do to figure it out on maybe a free cloud service, or spend as little money as you can. Hopefully none. A lot of services have free options. It doesn't matter that that's not what they use at the next job. You're beginning to be able to speak the language. You're beginning to be able to think, this is what's happening. This is what the folks who are in charge of the deployment have to think about, because I had to think about it. I've deployed my site. Now I want to update it. Did you find that difficult? Did you find it easy? Did you make it easier on yourself by automating things? It turns out, by taking the time to learn that stuff, you're kind of understanding what other people are going through. Maybe you become kind of that mediator type developer who, I may not know everything there is to know about being a database developer, but I can speak the language. So now it's a lot easier when he says, so back in the day, I do remember, this is going back a ways, when I think stored procedures and SQL Server were more popular, when the database developer on the team did all of the work with the database was done through stored procedures. It was like he was giving us an interface. That's just how I think things were done that way quite a while ago. Well, the fact that you can speak the language, no, I am not going to be writing the SQL code, but at least I can speak pretty coherently with the person to kind of understand when they say, hey, I've just given you a stored procedure that selects blah, 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 and you'll get these things. Okay. Like, I get it. I got it. Even though I'm not going to write it, I get it. So that's weird. It's kind of like being better at your specialty by understanding what the people around you have to do to interface with you.
Yeah.
I think a little bit about game programming here. I think you can't help it as a game programmer to understand, a modern game programmer, to understand a little bit about the 3D geometry and meshes and textures, even though you may not be building any of that stuff in any of the editors. At least you can speak the language. You know.
You know, I want to take a second here. You know, I happen to be like looking at, you know, I'm thinking about the chat. I know I'm totally changing topics here. I'm going off script here, but
that's all right.
I think there's a lot of people that we got that raid a while back, and a lot of those people I think are still with us, right?
Yep.
Not all. I mean, you know, cyber insecurity has like, you know, a huge audience, right?
Yeah.
And I'm really flattered and just it's really nice to see that like a bunch of people have stuck around in here with us, and we're having fun talking with you all. I always think, you know, we always say it makes our show better. You know, we're sort of a little startup. You know, like we don't have a huge audience, quite frankly. And it's always fun when we have some, you know, new people stopping by, and really just flattered that people have hung around for a while and are enjoying this conversation. Talk about, you know what, I'll flip this around a little bit. Talk about like, you know, being insecure about, you know, our, like, I mean, I have doubts about, you know, oh, are we any good at this show? You know, things like that, right? You know, it's like we all have this this guilt, this imposter syndrome, and things like that. And when people stick around, it's really nice. I appreciate that people are taking part in our show with us, and you know, this is what we do this, you know, weekly, right? We do this Wednesday nights. The summer might be a little messy. I don't know about vacation. We haven't even talked about that. But I got a few weeks coming up in August that I'll be out. But, you know, we try to have these conversations, you know, every Wednesday night. At least for us, it's night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time is when we start. And sometimes it's guests. You know, I was saying before, we do all kinds of different things. But if there's topics that people want to talk about, like, let us know.
Yep.
You know, you can also follow us on, you know, Twitter or here on Twitch and things like that. And let us know if you have topics like this that you want to talk about. This one was really interesting because I think it really crosses over. It's not even necessarily tech specific, right? We've been talking about it in the tech context, but I think a lot of times things are more, you know, some things are general. We talk about like, you know, I want to do a show. It's interesting because we're hearing from new developers. And I said to you earlier this week, I'd like to do a show specifically about working with junior developers.
Right.
Tips for experienced teams that maybe haven't worked with juniors before, and how do we incorporate them in? And you know what? You think about the sort of generalness of it, like, I wonder if that's the same tips we would give a marketing company that we're saying they're looking to hire a junior marketer. You know, like, I wonder how much of this stuff is not unique to our industry and things like that.
Right.
But I'd like to find someone as a guest. We were saying, like, I think it would be great to have a guest come on and someone that has some experience in this area that can shed some light. And we have our own thoughts, of course, on working with junior developers, but I'd like to hear from other people and things like that. Yep. So I'd like to try to find a guest. Maybe I'll do some advertising and see if I can get a guest to come on the show.
Yeah, I think it's often the most, it can be the most overlooked thing at a lot of places. I think some places, I'm just being honest, I think they throw up their hands and just figure like, forget it, let's just hire experienced developers. And then, I don't know, you find that you can't fill positions. I investing in newer developers, because I really find myself not very appreciative of the junior senior terminology, the way it's evolved. And then especially that like it was such, the terminology means so little that we've invented like mid-level. Like, how often, how much do we slice this pie before we just accept that some people have more experience in things than others? I am not a fan of it. So I would love to have as a guest someone not just with expertise, research. How can we all get better hiring, investing in newer developers so that, you know, they're experts in our business domain. They want to stay with us. They want to keep working on this problem. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be that the best way to move up in this industry is to get another job. But I think there's a lot of people that would argue that it is. And heck, there's a lot of people who would argue that in your first 5 to 10 years, you might work 4 different places. And is that good for the company? I mean, it shouldn't,
Well, it's definitely not.
Right.
Yeah,
so what's going
for the organization you're in?
What's going wrong here?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
People are going to come and go, and that's inevitable, right? There's always that.
That
right?
happens,
but
right?
Keeping some, it's so important to keep your teams happy and motivated, and staying with you. Now, listen, there's a flip side to everything. When someone leaves, that's an opportunity for an organization to bring in someone new, a fresh perspective or something like that. Not every company is always growing. And so sometimes the only way to get a fresh perspective is someone unfortunately quits. And okay, so take that as a positive instead of a negative. But, it's disruptive for companies to have people coming and going and things like that. It's important for companies to invest in their teams. This is a big part of my job, is like this whole aspect of leadership within my organization, mentoring developers, helping developers grow. And, and because when developers grow, like we gain, it's a win-win for everybody. They learn new skills or they get better at their craft, and it works out great for everybody. So that's really important. But working with junior developers, and again, I don't mean to be, disrespectful to junior developers, but I think that it is a different situation dealing with a junior developer than dealing with someone who's got, a lot of experience, call them a senior or whatever you want to call them, right? For in a lot of ways, right? There's also a lot to be gained from working with a junior developer. I'm not trying to say this is all negative. I'm just saying it is different. Different isn't good or bad, right? And I'm actually trying to deal with this a little bit at work right now. We're thinking about shifting our hiring strategy a little bit. I got to be careful what I say. I don't want people to start bombarding me with job requests like this isn't really happening yet. So, but we're really thinking about it. I said, wow, one of the benefits of having the show, right, Chris, is like, let's bring on a guest to talk about something that is important to me this week.
Yeah.
Because I would like to sort of learn from people who've done it already. That, should the team sizes be different? How should we change our expectations and things like that? It's fair to say we would have different expectations of someone who's new versus someone who's got experience, right? But the benefit is that bringing someone who, new in, especially when they're, young, is like, talk about the comment up above where it said smart, humble, and hungry. Hungry. Talk about that keyword. Okay. When you bring in, I want to say younger, but I don't know if that's the right word because I started software when I was older, right? But bringing in people that are younger in their career or earlier in their career are hungry. I mean, they are learning fast. They're bringing in the passion, right? They're bringing in ideas. There's so much that they can bring to the table. And so, I think it's sort of important to investigate that and figure out like how to make that work and how to be successul in that area with bringing on junior developers. You know?
So future show will have to get scheduled, I think.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good topic.
Yep.
So if you want to hear about that topic, follow us on Twitter.
Yep.
At the DevTalkShow, right? And then we'll throw some announcements out when we're gonna get that topic scheduled. I think it would be a good one, and we try to post other topics. Sometimes it's kind of last minute. Sometimes we don't really know what we're going to talk about until, like in this case, I don't know, an hour or two before showtime. We turn it into a pretty good show, and I'm not saying that like to brag. I'm talking about, what is that, a humble brag, or what do you call that? When like I'm actually pretty impressed with us. Like I cannot believe we pulled this one off. We turned this into a pretty good topic, and we find that with that's the case, honestly. If we have a decent topic to talk about, and we have some cool people in the chat that are throwing out ideas and comments and suggestions, that we could turn it into a pretty good discussion. I will say that we've been on for a while, and I think Chris and I are getting a little tired. It's after 11 here in the East Coast. I don't know where everyone that's viewing is from. I imagine from all over the place. But for us, I am getting a little tired because it's a work night, right? So I think we're going to wrap it up. Chris put a couple of great links in there, including our YouTube channel, where you can catch the replays. You can look at other topics that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And we certainly appreciate the support of following us or subscribe on YouTube if that's something that you're interested in doing. I want to thank everybody that joined in on the chat. I also want to thank all the people that didn't join in on the chat, right? I don't mean to say we didn't want you to, but we're just glad you're here listening, and it just makes the show better to have, so we appreciate it. Chris, any last thoughts?
No, thanks to everyone for being here. Thank you so much, Cyber Insecurity, for that awesome raid.
Oh.
What a great channel. And I can tell, a lot of InfoSec folks came along, which is cool. A topic that actually, I admit I don't, look, you want to talk about something I don't have a ton of expertise in, but yet developers need to be better at working with, just throwing code out there that unfortunately has to be remediated later is been the bane of this industry for some time. So glad to have you folks here. Hope you stick around. And if you enjoyed what we talked about and you follow the channel, you'll catch us again, or you can catch us on YouTube at youtube.com/the DevTalkShow. And again, thanks so much for joining. You gave us some great things to talk about, and it was really great to meet a lot of you folks, and hope that you've had a lot of fun, and really would hope to see you again.
Chris, do we want to sort of one good turn deserves another? What do they call that phrase? Do we try to pop a raid out there to somebody else?
I don't. The only problem is I don't have any specific target right now.
I'm going to look real quick.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take a quick look and see if there's anybody I know.
And normally,
streaming.
Normally what we do when we raid is we close our show with an outro, because this is getting recorded for YouTube. So that way we can just cut the raid part out of that for YouTube, but we still kind of have the closing. So if we do get a raid target here, the show will still close, and then we'd switch over to that channel, right?
There's a show I've watched before, is DaniStem, DANISTEM. I don't know. It says just chatting, but it is a show I've watched before. Let me see what's going on that channel real quick. Hang on a sec. I'll see if there's. Sometimes it's different things. Or if someone on the show has somebody that they think, oh, hey, well, here's another member of our community that we want to raid. I don't mind helping with that either, Chris. Right? Do you? If someone wants to throw something out there, I don't mind that as well. I don't mind that. So this channel, DaniStem, looks like she's doing some software development, facial recognition or something like that is what it looks like. So maybe that might be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
How about that? Why don't we throw it over to do a raid there?
Okay.
There's 45 people on the channel now, so it's So we're going to wrap up our show. So if you want to do the raid with us, we're going to wrap up our show.
Yep.
You'll see the closing. And then, I don't know, Chris is going to make that happen.
Yep.
Can you make that happen?
I think so.
All right, great. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for being with us this week. We had a great show. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time for the Dev Talk Show. Thanks a lot.